Chapter 1094. Ojios raised his head, his grayish-brown pupils reflecting the long and narrow figure. He saw a young man coming in from the front door of the garden of white roses. He did not have an invitation in his hand, only a long sword made of intertwined fragments. The fragments were joined to each other, leaving only a narrow gap between them. The sword emitted a dark red light, and there was a flame emblem on the sword. Few people knew that the emblem was called Flame, which was a golden flame. He held a scabbard in his other hand. It was made of fir wood, wrapped in black horse leather with a silver buckle and a steel sheath. The scabbard was held in his hand like a civilized stick. He wore a black woolen earl's coat. The surface was gray as if it had been weathered for a long time. Even the corners of the coat and the cuffs were worn out, revealing the threads. On the collar was the coat of arms of the Cardoloso family, which was made before he left the Abes. It was a long sword, inserted in the head of a brown bear, the black pine of Karsuk, the bear of the highlands. There was a black belt, a mithril buckle, 2 rings and a dial-like ornament on the belt. The hem of the coat covered the breeches that were also worn out in several places. Then there were the long boots, the unique long boots of granite. The leather was tanned by the best cobblers, waxed, soled, and inlaid with the coat of arms by the most careful shoemakers. It was a specialty of the edge of the Grimoires forest. He walked into the royal courtyard as if there was no one else around. He passed through the night wind of the 1,000-year-old imperial capital and also passed through his coat and hair, fluttering in the wind. The leaves chased after his footsteps and swirled into the garden. This was the last month of midsummer. He walked on the wind as if bringing with him the bleak feeling of autumn. After this, everything withered. The excellent bloodline of the Cardoloso family did not make Brando handsome or suave, but at least it made him a handsome young man. This was the mark of a knight's family. Coupled with his unique temperament, he was almost unforgettable. Behind him were Medisha, the Shire, Mephistopheles, Andrique, and the 3 Valkyries. The nobles of the Cruz family followed behind. As they walked on the white street, they seemed to remember the queen's power. Only old Nidevan and the Grand Duke of Flowers and Leaves could focus. In front of him, hundreds of imperial guards retreated like the tide, as if they had encountered some kind of scourge. However, even if it wasn't, it was more terrifying than a scourge. One only needed to look at the situation in the square outside to understand the reason for everything. The crisscrossing stone slabs on the square that had not been damaged for hundreds of years by magic were plowed into a 5-meter-deep ditch. There used to be a statue of Emperor Grantity there. There used to be a team of palace knights stationed beside the statue. There used to be a tight security line in the square. Now there was nothing left. Who is he? How did this person get in? The nobles looked at each other. Some of them began to regret attending the banquet. The show that was going to be played tonight was beyond their imagination. Perhaps it had never happened in the palace for hundreds of years. Some of the older nobles compared Brendel's appearance to Brendel's and vaguely felt that the youth looked familiar, but that was a story from decades ago. Even if they thought about it carefully, it was difficult to remember that there was a person from Aween who once dominated the empire. And today there was going to be a person from Aween who would shake the entire empire. That was exactly what Ojios saw in his eyes. But that was not all. The first thing he noticed was not Brando's body, but the other party's cold gaze. It was as if it was tangible and nailed him to the ground. There was no way he could resist it. It was easy to imagine the shame and anger in the prince's heart. "I've never seen the Lord so angry." Scarlet stared at the tall figure that appeared at the gate. No matter how much she did not want to see the Lord here at this moment, her heart was full of peace. She loosened her grip and the azure lance fell to the ground with a clang. She suddenly remembered that she had indeed seen the feudal lord show a similar attitude. That was during the first battle in Abes. The lord stared at the ancient castle gate with a cold expression that was not inferior to this moment. At that time, Medisha told her that this was for the dead. But she could not understand. Perhaps the dead deserved to be sad but not angry because anger was worthless. Because the death of a commoner did not have much value. She was born in the mountains of Chablis and had seen too many deaths. Plagues, accidents, wars, monsters, they could all be the cause of a commoner's death. They would only be buried carelessly. Perhaps some people would be sad but no one would be angry. Some people just disappeared but some people could not tolerate it. That was the most special person she had ever seen. A noble who was about the same age as her, but her lord. He killed Grodin. When the sword pierced the baron's chest, she noticed that the lord's face did not have the joy of revenge, only cold contempt. It was as if this was karma and it should be so. Just for some people he did not know. At this moment, the same contempt appeared on his face. "Is it because of me?" Scarlet's heart pounded as her mind wandered. Why would the Lord be angry for me? Perhaps this naive girl would never understand this question. Ogios left Scarlet and turned his head to look at Brando coldly. The young man's aura made him feel like he was being provoked. The Silver Queen stopped in front of the main entrance of the White Rose Palace. She turned around and looked at the scene coldly. It was as if she was not the host and Brando was not a guest. The three of them looked at each other and the scene became quiet. Junior Nydivan was a little hesitant and wanted to step forward, but his father held him back. The wrinkles on Senior Nydivan's face seemed to have deepened in the cool night breeze. He shook his head gently. I am the great Emperor's Prime Minister, and you are his subject. But you do not know what kind of person our king is. Little Nydivan's face was full of shame. This was the first time his father had said this to him. Old Nydivan pointed at the youth in front of him and replied, Let our count talk to his majesty. Only when his majesty has calmed down will he listen to us. His majesty will be calm? Little Nydivan wondered if his old father's brain wasn't working properly. But old Nydivan shook his head and did not answer. The Duke of Flowers glanced at him and smiled without saying a word. Ogios glared at Brendel like a brown bear and spoke coldly after a long while. After a while he asked coldly, Who are you? Brando glanced at him, then turned his gaze to the Silver Queen. Ogios looked as if he had been pricked by a needle. His tanned face turned red. In his memory he was always the one who ignored others. He did not expect to be ignored by a country bumpkin who came out of nowhere. And it was in front of so many people. Henriette, who was lying under the table, saw this scene and was beaming with excitement. He pulled Conrad's hand away from his mouth and gasped, Who is this guy? He has character. I'm telling you seriously, Conrad, I like this guy. When this is over, I must get to know him. Conrad looked troubled. I'm afraid Her Majesty might not think so. Her Majesty the Queen? Henriette snorted. Her Majesty the Queen is the Queen of the Empire, not my queen. I'm a noble of the Empire. Her Majesty has no right to control who I make friends with. If you really want to put it that way, Conrad replied in annoyance, fine, it's up to you. But subconsciously he also felt that this guy was indeed out of line. Perhaps it was a little refreshing. He had to admit that he was a little biased towards him. He was a knowledgeable young man, completely different from his companions. He frowned and thought for a moment, then suddenly patted the latter's shoulder. I think I know who he is. Who is that? He has a big background. At this time, the brown bear Ogios seemed to have finally figured out Brando's background. This was all thanks to his follower. The follower trotted all the way to his side and whispered a few words in his ear. The brown bear straightened up and looked at Brando with contempt. Bah, he spat, I thought he was someone, but he's just a country bumpkin. He was completely relieved. He pointed at Scarlet and said to Brando, She's mine now. Erwin Country Bumpkin, you can scram now. Erwin Country Bumpkin. Among the nobles there were always some who reacted quickly. It's that Cardeloso family. Someone let out a few whispers, and then a name was spread among the nobles. It was made up of only 3 words. But it weighed more than 1,000 pounds. Sword St. Darius. After 60 years, the grandson of Sword St. Darius returned to the Empire. The way people looked at Brando changed again. Henriette muttered to himself, So it's him? Are you close to him? Conrad asked curiously. He did not know that his companion was related to the legendary Sword Saint of Erewhon. No, it's my grandfather, Henriette bared his teeth. My grandfather had a duel with Sword St. Darius and lost a mouthful of his teeth. What? Ogios obviously did not hear the whispers of the 2 people under the table. In fact, he also did not hear the whispers of the crowd. He was a noble of the Latch of Wa, but compared to him, the nobles of Erewhon were not even worth mentioning. In his eyes, Brando dared to threaten him, so he was already a dead man. If Brando dared to take a step back, he would press on and leave his head here. In the customs of the mountain people, blood for blood was the only way to repay blood with blood. But he did not expect Brando's response to him to be so simple and direct. The latter turned around, glanced at him and said, Don't worry. You have a bad memory. Scarlet, who was at the side, realized that her lord was about to attack Ogios. She quickly shouted, My lord, he has the strength of the elemental enlightenment, but the girl did not say this sentence out loud, because she saw Brando raise his hand. Prince Ogios, who was 100 meters away from him, flew out as if he had collided with a dragon. He crashed into the buildings on the left side of the White Rose Garden as if this brown bear was not an expert of the elemental enlightenment, but an ordinary person. But obviously, An ordinary person would not be able to break through the walls of a building that had more than 10 floors. Everyone's mouth was wide open. Some of them were still worried for Darius' grandson. Obviously, Prince Ogios was not that popular. But after the previous battle, the nobles more or less knew the strength of the mountain people's prince. The mountain girl defeated dozens of palace knights in one move, but she could not do anything to Ogios. Although the former was not as strong as the Flame family knight, she was at least an upper gold-ranked warrior. The latter's strength was even more obvious. Darius' grandson looked to be in his late teens. How could he be a match for the brown bear in human form? In terms of mentality, the nobles were more positive about the humans than the brown bear. However, what happened next turned everyone's expectations upside down. At this moment, all the nobles present had the same thought, as expected of Darius' grandson. As people of the imperial capital, they obviously had a deep impression of the legendary figure from 60 years ago. And for some of the older nobles, it was as if they had seen the nightmare of the nobles from 60 years ago. The building was still collapsing and gravel was rolling down. For a moment, the White Rose Garden was silent. The Silver Queen finally opened her mouth. She only said one sentence coldly, "How dare you? Take him down." The four witches were in midair. Atatrice opened the gate of the Bunasan kingdom. She was afraid that Brando would repeat his previous trick and escape from under her nose, so she first opened her extreme plane. The lonely hill reflected the dark starry sky, and it spread out in the sky like flowing water, like a giant mouth in the void. But just as she touched the gate, she heard a voice that broke her heart. Scram! Before the golden sea witch could react, she spat out a mouthful of blood and fell from the sky. Beside her, the witch queen's expression changed drastically. She put her hand on the line of law, but before she could say anything, she heard the old woman on the other side trembling as she shouted, Ekis is in the Bunasan." But unfortunately, her voice was destined not to be heard by many people. Because more people were rising into the sky. 1, 2, 3. The sword-bearer Bradley, the lion sword Saint Willick, and the other of the twin jade annulus of Saint Cantifer Palace, the sword saint of speed, Leo. Then came the Imperial Gate, the Grand Commander of the Flame Knight Order, Richard, the Lord of the Mirror Realm, Lightless Return, and his old rival, Saipan. Almost all of them were old friends and familiar faces from the battle at the Cold Dew Manor. But what followed next was a list of names that Brendel had only seen or heard of in the game before. First was the Grand Commander of the Imperial Guards, Talia, and the other three Vice-Commanders of the Flame Knight Order, the Silver Eye Fine, Saint Maximilian, and the Ascetic Julian. As for the other three, Brando had never seen or heard of them. It was not surprising that they were the hidden forces of the Cruz royal family. But what made him squint his eyes slightly was the last person to rise into the sky. Dragon Queen Gwendolyn. 16 Supreme Realms. A sage. Like the stars in the night sky, they shone for a moment. And above the stars, countless Flame Knight Order were rising into the sky. Specks of stars surrounded the bright stars. All the nobles of the empire present couldn't help but raise their heads and open their mouths. It was unknown whether they were surprised by such a grand scene or by the people who attracted this scene. Under the starry sky, the Silver Queen looked down at Brando with the Empire's night sky as the background. She pondered for a moment before slowly speaking. "Descendant of Darius, you have a trait that your grandfather didn't have, and that is, you overestimate yourself." Chapter 1096. This is the land that God promised you. It illuminates the sky like a stream of light. Your wisdom is like a raging flame. Your crown is as noble as the stars. You are the king of the ancestors, the people of God. Blessed are the people of the world. Because God and the kingdom, wisdom and spirit have descended. Elnormus 7 lines, Dr. 3079. 1. 7 Lecanto. Constance's voice was low and long. It passed through the courtyard of the Garden of White Roses and the forest, recounting the past 60 years ago. Your grandfather, Sword Saint Darius, was a genius that only appeared once in 100 years. His bloodline was equally noble. He was the promised one who was born in Karsuk during the year of flowing flame. He was the pride of the Cardoloso family, and you? You were born in the Cardoloso family and received unimaginable glory and pride. You were lucky, but you did not know when to stop. The title of Earth Sword Saint could not protect you forever. The Cardoloso family was nothing in front of the Empire. I gave you a chance, but you did not cherish it. The Silver Queen gently raised her right hand and extended her index finger. The tip of her finger was like that of a young girl, slender and long. A drop of golden blood flew out from her fingertip and fused into the void in front of her. After all, mortals could not understand this world. No matter how outstanding their talents were, they were just like the smartest monkeys who could only dominate a group of monkeys. Darius was once such an outstanding promise, but his descendants could not see such a drop of blood flowing from their bodies. This was a pure bloodline. How could the filthy blood flowing in the bodies of the Iron Folk be compared to the glorious and dazzling era of the past? This was the sorrow of the mortal world. That woman's bloodline has also been purified to a certain extent. The head of the Valkyrie, Brunhilde, suddenly spoke. Her low and hollow voice lingered in everyone's ears like a whisper. It seems that Her Majesty's experiment is not hopeless, the Shire replied. Only Medisha did not care about this. Constance's words made the little princess slightly unhappy. She said, "The Lord did not rely on anyone. Before this he did not even know of his own birth. He is only 20 years old. This experience is enough to write an epic even among my people. It is not unprecedented." Me? Medisha shook her head and said softly, "I am not as good as the Lord. I am a princess after all. My people have poured as much effort into me as anyone else." Charles smiled and patted the little princess on the shoulder as he said, "Don't worry. A person's life is like the stars in the sky. When we see the stars decorating the night sky, we often overlook the most dazzling light among them. However, some people are born to shine brightly in an era. The fools have no way of knowing this, and that is why history and books are filled with myths and legends. This is a heavy era. The mortals lost the favor of the gods. Hundreds of millions of lights were extinguished. People used their reverence for the sages to move forward in the darkness. They built kingdoms and cities on top of suffering, and lit torches in the wilderness. The glory of civilization was passed down in the end. But people still held on to the past in one way or another. Some were immersed in the past and did not move forward. But some were not willing to die in the peaceful memories of the past. Some took a step forward. Some were ahead of others. Because of this, after the Myrnas, there were 4 empires standing on the land. The names of the pioneers were carved on the stone tablets. But after thousands of years of wind and frost, the names on the stone tablets were blurred. In the holy palace of the Wind Empress, in Fanzin's holy palace, 2 pairs of calm eyes showed a look of indulgence. Outside White Harbor, the sound of a bell echoed, reminding the sails in the harbor to prepare for the storm. William Peaster looked at the snowstorm. The gigantic figure of the evil dragon Fuchsia was gradually fading away. Her voice came from the snowstorm. "We will meet again in the elemental frontier, Bugas." The time had come. In the past 370 years, 1847 promised ones were born in Wonde. Among them there were 13 chosen ones. In the past 100 years this number had increased to half. Since the first era, the progress of history seemed to be shining with the names of geniuses. Every dazzling star had profoundly changed the trajectory of the world. But Brando did not tell the Silver Queen. This was not a sign of the blood of the mortals being purified. The era of the gods had long passed forever. The dark dragon would not descend again. The Myrna's kingdom would eventually become incomplete words in the books. A new era was coming, but it did not bring the glorious past. It was a bloody war. This was the war of the mortal world. Brendel raised his sword, and the gaps between the fragments shone with a dazzling reddish-gold light. He did not cherish the chance of others giving him, but he truly cherished the people around him. Unfortunately, he would not say these, because he understood that to some people they were meaningless. This was a principle that only a few people understood. It was summed up by tens of thousands of bloodshed and deaths. The first one to rush in front of him was the Grand Commander of the Flame Family Knights, Imperial Gate Richard. He raised his sword, and the flame blade in his hand clashed with the Grand Commander's sword. Then there was a sharp sound and sparks burst out from the blades of the 2 swords. After 3 consecutive strikes, both of them took a step back. Prince Ogios crawled out of the rubble with half of his body. His face was covered in dust as he climbed out of the rubble. His eyes were bloodshot as he watched the scene unfold. This was a battle between Lemeters, but he acted as if he had not heard anything. He had never suffered so much in his life. It was a great humiliation. In the Latch of Wa, his father was above him. But here no one could control him. The prince's impulsive personality was magnified. The first thing he did was not to check his injuries, but to search for his sword. What a fool! She really doesn't know what's good for her. Scarlet had just waved Firmament back into her hand when she heard Ovina's mocking voice in her mind. A mixed-blood deity of who knows how many generations, and she dares to spout such nonsense. She doesn't even know that your lord. The girl suddenly stopped talking. She curled her lips and said, Humph, she doesn't know her place. Scarlet did not understand. She was anxious, but she realized that she still could not help Brando. Because of the blood of God, she had been hovering at the peak of the gold level. She had not even activated her elemental powers. With Firmament's help, she could defeat opponents before the beginning of the elemental powers of truth. But when it came to the peak of the precepts or even the supreme realm, she was still powerless. Ovina seemed to sense her master's mood. She said, "Those two idiots are obsessed. Why don't you help them?" Me. The Highlander girl paused for a moment, her amber eyes shining brightly. "Can I be of help to my liege? Yes, you are a little too weak. But that's normal. You don't have to be discouraged. Did you know that there were a few extremely powerful figures in history? They weren't really geniuses, but through hard work, they were still able to carve their names into the annals of history." "How can I help, my lord?" Scarlet asked calmly. Ovina's shadow appeared beside her. She glanced at the battlefield calmly. "It's simple. They want to suppress your lord in terms of bloodline. Why don't you grant them their wish? Open up all the access channels and show them what your lord can do." "Open up the access channels? Access is bloodline, stupid girl. Improve my bloodline?" Scarlet was stunned. "How can I do that?" "No." Ovina shook her head vehemently. "Your lord is right. You really are a stupid girl. Bloodline is not up to you to decide. What I mean is for you to open up all the access channels. Open up all the access channels." Scarlet asked again, dumbfounded. "It's simple. You are a knight of the Azure Knight. Your access comes from the gate of arbitration. You are supposed to be a supervisor and manager. This is your scope of authority. What should I do?" "Password? Password?" The Knight of the Imperial Gate was locked in battle with Brando. Willick had joined the fray. However, they were still evenly matched. It was as if Brando's power had increased by leaps and bounds in the span of a few hours. Willick, who had joined the battle later, felt a chill run down his spine. This young man was too scary. How old was he? He had heard rumors about the sword St. Darius from 60 years ago. Could it be that everyone in the Cardoloso family was as crazy as him? What he didn't know was that after the battle at the Frost Dew Manor, Brando finally had time to consolidate the new characteristics of his elements of time and space. As the elements of the power of existence, their potential was beyond anyone's imagination. Behind them, Bradley and Maximilian were being held back by Sydney and Veronica, while Sanleo and Fane joined the battle behind them. Brendel suddenly stopped when he saw Brendel joining the battle. Then a shield appeared in his hand. On the shield there were bright flowing flames, a radiant holy church, a supreme laurel crown and the kingdom of God. A holy sword hung alone in the sky and fell straight into the ground, as if it was going to split the entire world into two. This shield was very familiar to everyone who lived in the center of the empire. It was the angel's holy shield, the symbol of Rushta, the shield of Aroma. The moment Brando took out the shield, the faces of the supreme realm powerhouses around him changed. This was the holy relic left by the Flame King for Cruz. How could it fall into the hands of an outsider? Richard was the first to react. His heart was burning with anger and he was about to explode. However, at the last moment, a strange thought suddenly flashed in his mind. Why could he take away the holy shield? This shield was placed on the victory square by Gretel himself. After 1,000 years, no one could get within 3 feet of it. Even if the great holy Sivara came personally, it was the same. Chapter 1097. While Richard hesitated, Julian the ascetic, who was known for his fiery temper, let out an earth-shattering roar. "Shield of Irama, how dare you!" Like Sydney, the ascetic's sainthood came from the angel of Irama, who wielded the sacred sword. How could he allow others to touch Irama's sacred item? A ring of platinum flames appeared in his eyes. His anger was already burning. Without a word, he threw a punch at Brando. This was a full-powered attack from someone above the Lemiter realm. Rushta had been fighting for the entire night, and this was his strongest attack. Under his punch, the ground of the Garden of the White Rose cracked inch by inch, and the broken stones and stone floated up from the ground as if they had lost their gravity. One could only imagine the power contained in the punch itself. "Be careful." Fane shouted angrily at his colleague. "Her Majesty wants to capture him alive. Without Irama's approval he can't use the sacred shield." The words were stuck in his throat. He clearly saw the sacred shield in Brando's hand flash slightly, and all of Julian's attacks were completely nullified. Absolute barrier. This was the legendary ability of the shield of Irama. This was impossible. Fane almost stopped what he was doing. He was not the only one. In fact, All of the supreme-class fighters around Brando who were related to the Holy Cathedral of Fire could not help but pause. They all thought of a terrifying possibility. If this young man had Irama's approval, then, what did this mean? But this question was only meaningful to the experts. To the onlookers, Brando was not in a good situation. Little Nydivan, who was watching the battle from the side, frowned. He did not understand what was going on. He even asked anxiously, "Why isn't he using that thing?" The old prime minister patted him on the shoulder and shook his head. "The count has his own plans. You are also the prime minister of the empire. Calm down and show the magnanimity of a noble." Little Nydivan shook his head with a bitter smile. How could he remain calm? This battle not only determined Brando's fate, but also the survival of the Nydivan family. "Father, grandfather?" A soft voice came from behind the two of them. Old Nydivan and little Nydivan turned around at the same time and saw the prime minister's daughter standing there in shock. "Delphian? This is..." Delphian's face was still a little pale. She raised her head, and her eyes happened to reflect the shocking battle in the White Rose Garden. She then saw the mountain maiden standing in the middle of the crowd. Her fiery red hair made her heart stop slightly. These people. Old Nydivan glanced at his granddaughter, shook his head and slowly turned back to answer, "These people, this day is his stage. Because some people were born to shine in an era." The prime minister's daughter had a complicated look in her eyes. But the color in the other pair of eyes was much simpler and more indifferent. Silver Queen Constance looked forward and watched a drop of her blood fly into the void. At this moment she didn't even care too much about the battle. The result of the battle was inevitable. But for this moment she had sacrificed too much. The empire had also prepared for too long. Decades of waiting and misunderstanding. But if the world understood the meaning behind all of this, then she believed that all of this would be meaningful. She raised her head and saw the huge magic array forming in the void. Through this magic array she looked at the black moon in the sky. There she seemed to see the backs of two eras intersecting. Everything was ready. Under the arrangement of fate, rumbling sounds came from the sky. It was as if some invisible force swept away the dark clouds in the sky. The running wolves were forced to retreat. Above the clouds, the magic array of the elemental boundary fitted together like gears. They rotated in the sky, one ring after another. Every time the vertical axis moved, the silver lines of law swept across the sky for thousands of miles. In every corner of Wonde, hundreds of millions of people witnessed this spectacle. They saw the clouds shining, and then the shadow of a huge tower that reached the sky descended from the sky. In many places around the White Mountains, in the Silver Coast and Lubeck, and even in the distant Nine Phoenixes to the east, in the Dead Moon Inland Sea, in the polar regions north of Farnezane, and in the great glaciers, boundless darkness began to spread. The eternal night had descended. XX, judgment, light lost. The green sea was calm. In the darkness, the eyes of Eloranta reflected the huge tower. In the ever-misty forest, the singing of the elves and ghosts did not stop for a moment. The same scene was reflected in the exceptionally calm eyes of the Wind Queen. The huge tower hung alone in the sky. The rustling of the pine trees reminded Andina of the black pine forest in the Grimoires Mountains. She pushed open the door and walked out of her room. She looked up at the scenery in the sky, her eyes sparkling with brilliance. Freya was still talking to Princess Griffin in the room. The candlelight in the room flickered and a huge map was laid out. A letter was thrown to the side. The letter was opened and a corner of the letter was revealed. On the pure white letter paper, the pitch-black words were written in a somewhat distorted manner. At the beginning of the month, the Queen of Banshees, Yalvit, led an army to attack the front line of Gold City. The King of the Withered Lands, Lawson the Glutton, attacked the Silman area. A slightly tired but gentle voice sighed. "They're here. Mr. Knight never expected them to be wrong. Your Highness, Freya, you like Mr. Knight?" I want to give Mr. Knight a gift. Do you know what the best gift is, Freya?" "I don't know. It's a victory, Freya." "But the royal faction? Don't worry about them. I'm Haru's sister, the princess of the kingdom. This time I will fight for the dream that Mr. Knight shares with me." This was the story of the Year of the Sword. At the end of the year, the Black Rose of the Roman Tua arrived as expected. At that moment, far away in the center of the empire, the Silver Queen was staring blankly at the lonely tower in the sky. It had a holy white exterior and had once shone brightly for an era. Its name was also the source of the fire of civilization, Babel. It had fallen and now it had returned. On the battlefield, Prince Ognos was roaring angrily as he pounced at Brando. He gripped a gleaming blade tightly in his hand. The rumbling sound echoed through the clouds. All access to Tiamat and the elemental border had been opened. Scarlet tried her best to speak loudly to Ovina so that her voice wouldn't be drowned out. "And then?" she asked loudly. Ever since the planeswalkers left, this was the first time the lines of law between heaven and earth had become so active. Constance looked at her hands in disbelief. This was the power of the divine people. It was even more powerful than she had imagined. Legend had it that the gods could control the network of laws above the elemental border. At that moment she could clearly feel the connection between the entire world and herself. It was as if she could control the world with the lift of her hand. There seemed to be a stream of light flowing before her eyes. Amidst her astonishment, she saw a silver screen of light appear before her eyes. On the screen were complex words from the oldest civilization. The jumping symbols and words were incomprehensible to mortals, but she could barely make out the meaning. "Authority granted?" The Silver Queen finally smiled. It was as if she had returned to the modern world. She saw a pair of wings made of light growing out of Prince Ogios's brown bear-like body. A set of ancient yet strange armor covered his body. He raised his hands high, and the dagger in his hand turned into a shining two-handed longsword. A pillar of light fell upon him and covered his entire body. A warrior's bloodline, although low, was at least different from mortals. Constance raised her hands slightly. After waiting for so long, she finally got her reward, and it was even better than she had imagined. Babel was born. An era had returned. And then? A strange light reflected in Ovina's eyes. It was frighteningly bright. She made a very human-like gesture and licked her lips. "And then all that's left is to wait. Can you really help the Lord?" Scarlet asked loudly. "Perhaps," Ovina answered. "You should trust him more." The sudden surge of power made Ogno's entire body burn. It was as if endless power filled his body. There was no explanation for this, but perhaps there was one. "I am the chosen one, the destined ruler of this world." His mind was in a frenzy. He roared, gripped his sword with both hands and slashed down at Brando with all his might. There was a loud clang. Ognos felt his hands go numb. Then to his shock he realized that he had been blocked. But what blocked him was neither Brando's sword nor Brando's shield. It was a strange card. None of the supreme class fighters around him noticed, but he could see that card. It was a black and white card. The surface of the card was made of some unknown material. It shone with a strange light. It floated in midair, blocking the blade in his hand. It exuded an indestructible aura. There was no sound in the void, but Ognos clearly heard a thunderous shout in his heart, telling him what the essence of the world was. That was the law. That firm order seemed to form a world of its own. Brando reached out his hand and tapped lightly on the card. Countless mysterious patterns spread from the card, as if they were telling of countless stories that had been buried in history. They were moving and touching. They were the crusades that knights raised their banners, the promises that warriors kept with their lives. It had a name. It was called loyalty. Loyalty knows no place or time, life or death. Chapter 1098. The card was rising into the sky. The energy in the dark elemental pool quickly dissipated, and Brendel saw countless dark tentacles growing out of the card. These tentacles plunged straight into the ground, and in a flash, they were connected to the other world beneath the Lust Tower. Two powers from different laws met and came to an agreement. It was silent, but it described a law. The card is attached to a non-Darkangel creature and returns it to the battlefield with 5 battle counters. The creature has indestructible and anti-all powers. Even if the creature is removed from battle or placed in a graveyard, the ability will take effect after a long time. Maintain a phase. At that moment, Ognos looked up. Richard, Julian, Willick and Fane looked up. Conrad and Henriette, who were hiding under the table, looked up. Holy music lingered in the sky. The thick clouds parted to form a door of light, standing opposite Babel Fortress. When the door of light opened, countless swords of light pierced down from the clouds, heading straight for the entire city of Rushta. At that moment, it was as if dawn had broken and the sun had been seen. The 1,000-year-old imperial capital shook violently, and the ground shook violently. No one could stand firm, and even those above the St. Plain were swaying in midair. The Silver Queen held onto the doorpost and looked at the scene in shock. Ovina, on the other hand, looked pleased. The divine folk are not necessarily planeswalkers, but the most powerful planeswalkers must be the purest of divine folk. Scarlet said nothing. She looked at the Lord in the crowd with reverence in her eyes. The female knight continued, because only they can connect to the outermost rules of Martha's network. That is the language of the world, the power of existence. An angel descended from the sky. It was male or female and had no facial features. Lightning and fire filled the sky and formed a pair of wings behind it. It was as if countless people were chanting behind it. The sound of singing filled the sky. Behind it was like an illusion. Half of it was the twilight war of the gods, and the other half was the gilded Chongqing temple. It walked down from the clouds, and there seemed to be an invisible staircase in the void. With every step it took, the flame family knights and lemeters closest to it in the air would be set ablaze, and they screamed as they fell from mid-air. It looked at Brendel, then pointed its finger forward. Richard, Willick, Leo, Finn, and Urien, who were in front of Brando, spat out a mouthful of blood at the same time and flew back. Iroma was a holy angel, and under the loyalty of the Planeswalker card, her power was infinitely close to that of a demigod. He had fought against Milo's will in the Dead Frost Forest. At this very moment, Iroma was the demigod will that ruled over the skies of Rushta. In the blink of an eye, the Empire had lost 3 lemeters and severely injured more than 5. Only a few lemeters who had yet to attack Brando, as well as the witches and magi who were still chanting their spells, remained. Constance couldn't believe what she was seeing. Even in her deepest nightmares, she had never imagined a scene like this. The guardian of the Empire for thousands of years, the angel Iroma, had appeared in front of her and stood behind her enemy. What was wrong with this world? Originally, it was the most inconspicuous part of the whole plan, but now it almost overturned all the cards on the table. In the air, Dragon Queen Gwendolyn was the first to retreat. She looked at Iroma in the air and Brando on the ground in surprise. Her eyes were filled with the most fanatical colors, but she muttered to herself. So it's like this. This is just right. Brando didn't even look at the two of them. Instead, he turned to look at Ogios, who was the only one in front of him, and said, "Do you remember what I said to you before?" The latter opened his mouth wide and froze. Brando's gaze passed through him. A pillar of fire descended from the sky and turned the Highlander prince into ashes. The latter didn't even have time to scream before he completely disappeared from this world. Everyone who witnessed this scene couldn't help but keep quiet out of fear. "Stop it." The Silver Queen, who was in a daze for a long while, finally reacted. She couldn't help but shout out in rage. Ogios was an important part of her plan, and yet he was killed by Brando just like that. Brando then looked at her and replied, "Your Majesty, I've said before that Scarlet's will is free. I hope you can respect her wishes." The Silver Queen took a deep breath. She couldn't understand how a mortal who wasn't even Su Ying's person could have such great power. She clearly saw Brando's blood. It was the filthy blood of the Iron Folk. "You." She gritted her teeth and asked, "Who on earth are you?" "I'm the descendant of Darius Cardeloso, a mortal," Brando answered without hesitation. Was there such a mortal? The few sword saints who were lying on the ground in a daze had this strange thought in their minds. The Silver Queen gritted her teeth so hard that they made grinding sounds. Brando continued, "Your Majesty, Iroma has protected the people of Cruz for 1,000 years. The power of its holy position comes from the position of the angel who wields the holy sword. Do you know which holy sword it is?" "What does that have to do with me?" Constance said angrily. But a voice answered her question. "It's the holy sword Amber." Medish's voice rang out. The Silver Elf Princess was previously engaged in a battle with an ultimate sword saint. But now that the ultimate sword saint had been reduced to ashes, she finally had the time to speak. "That's the holy sword that mortals control their own fate. The sword is engraved with the promises of the ancient spirits to this world. Everyone can control their own fate. And mortals, it was with this spirit that they resisted the invasion of dusk. And the sages, it was with this spirit that they resisted the rule of the Dark Dragon. 1,000 years ago it was like this. 1,000 years later it's still like this." "Humph, what a joke," the Silver Queen interrupted her. "These are just lies made up by the Silver Elves, the Bugas and the Four Sages. The mortals stole the authority that originally belonged to the gods, so the gods left. Unfortunately, you don't understand at all. The power that the mortals obtained is not even worth mentioning compared to the true gods." She glanced contemptuously at Emma, who was still in midair. "A mere holy position that isn't even a demigod, is this what you're relying on? Very well, I'll let you see the true power of the gods." Constance raised her hand. The blood of the divine people flowed in her body, powerful and pure. But at this moment she felt a little regretful. Unfortunately, this wasn't the purest blood. But it didn't matter. The entire plan was about to go back on track. With this thought in mind, she pointed her index finger at Brando. Everyone saw that the reflection of the Tiamat Codex in the sky outside the elemental border suddenly formed 4 shadows. 4 giant magic circles began to rotate slowly. After the clouds dispersed, 4 giant arcs of light hundreds of miles wide appeared directly above Rushta, overlapping each other above Brando's head, forming a majestic and mysterious magic circle. Every single person below the formation was shocked. At this moment, they all felt as if they were being locked down by a powerful and unstoppable will. This is. Royal suddenly stopped his spell and looked at what was happening in the sky in shock. Why did the level of the magic network increase? A spell beyond the 14th circle, Saipan added in a low voice beside him. Beside him, Scarlet's face was pale. She almost instinctively reached out to grab Ovina's hand, but she grabbed nothing. What's going on, Lady Ovina? But Ovina was smiling. Don't be afraid, little girl. Just wait and see. The show has just begun. A terrifying aura pressed down on the sky above Rushta, making it hard for everyone to breathe. The wolves running outside the city and the frenzied children of evil even stopped and looked at the sky with fear. Thousands or even tens of thousands of years ago, it was this power that had made them their enemy. Silver Queen laughed maniacally. What do you think the divine people are relying on to fight against the Twilight Dragon? With those laughable tricks of yours? How foolish. She looked at Brendel with some satisfaction, hoping to find fear on his face. But unfortunately, she was destined to be disappointed. Because Brando's expression was blank. In fact, he couldn't help but be blank. Because the moment the Silver Queen activated her powers, he realized that his retina was being washed. This was something that had never happened before. His game system seemed to have gone crazy. Suddenly, numerous inquiry boxes popped up in front of him, and various menus flew in like snowflakes. This situation was a bit like the situation when his computer was infected with a virus. One after another, light screens opened in front of him, and a stream of data poured down like a waterfall. There were all kinds of information on it, and finally, it stopped at a picture. Of course, it wasn't a blue screen. It was a light purple screen. There was a circle on it, and in the center was the Ouroboros emblem. It spun and then flattened out. Then a choice popped up. Yes or no. At that moment, Brando seemed to be enlightened. He finally understood what this was. This was the demigod mode's authorization. In the past game, the Dragon of the Sky, Tiaskraz, in the final battle against Ekis, had once shared this authorization with the strongest player. In the video he had seen the exact same scene, but the emblem was not the same. That was the emblem of the dragon god Bahamut, and his. Why did it look a bit like the emblem of All for One? He remembered that at that time, it was obtained by the guild master of the strongest guild, Diamond Force. And at this moment, the same scene reappeared in front of him. At this moment, it was as if he had returned to that past dream. Everything that happened in the past was still vivid in his memory. Brando couldn't help but laugh. He looked up with a smile and looked at the Silver Queen in front of him with a strange gaze. He could not help but feel a little sympathy, a little pity. At this moment, a voice reached his ears. Her Majesty the Queen has gathered 3 divine people and requested to reopen the Truth Parliament. As the inheritors of the Azure Lance, Scarlet and I have strictly examined her request. We have agreed to this request and temporarily assigned Tiamat's authority to all the authority holders present. The highest authority record is the Throne of Destiny with the emblem of Martha. The lowest authority record is the Warrior with the emblem of Tiamat. Recording complete. The meeting will last for 15 minutes. Ovina's voice paused. Little one, hurry up. Brando was stunned. He glanced at the Silver Queen and wondered if he was one of the 3 divine people. But judging by Her Majesty the Queen's behavior, she did not seem to consider him as one of them. But that was not important. He waved his hand lightly. It was a casual gesture. But in the next moment, Royal and Saipan simultaneously felt their connection to the magic network completely cut off. The strange armor on the Highlander prince suddenly dimmed. Even the angel Iroma behind Brando, after a flash of light, lowered her head slightly and stopped breathing. The terrifying aura that had locked onto the entire Lushta suddenly disappeared. Everyone looked up and saw the Tiamat magic circle in the air begin to rotate and reset. The Silver Queen looked at Brando as if she had seen a ghost. Her bloodline came from a high-ranking divine person, so she understood what had happened better than a chosen one like Ogios. The network of law was cutting off all ports except for the highest authority. How is this possible? You're just an iron person. She felt a chill run down her spine and even began to tremble. The power of the network of law was disappearing very quickly. Soon, even her footsteps became weak and she almost fell to the ground. "How can you have?" Brando looked at her. After a while he spoke. His voice seemed to pass through the clouds and made the whole world buzz. "Your Majesty the Queen, are you calm now?" Chapter 1099. The leaves hanging on the branches drooped down, and the insects quieted down. In the vast courtyard, it was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Everything happened so quickly that the nobles did not have time to react. In the blink of an eye, their supreme queen was kneeling on the 31st step of the St. Cantifer Palace. More than half of the Empire's supreme-class fighters were dead or injured. The entire Garden of the White Rose was a mess. The Imperial Guards were scattered everywhere, and the Flame family knight was unconscious. The descendant of Sword St. Darius was still standing at the main entrance, unharmed. He did not even move half a step. The Silver Queen had ruled the Empire for decades, but the nobles were not satisfied. Although the previous emperor was powerful, he still gave the nobles some face. The queen treated the nobles like her pet dogs, and the harmony between the nobles and the royal family was long gone. But the opponents had already left. Those present were the queen's close followers. The nobles could not accept letting a foreigner flaunt his power in the empire, even if this person was the grandson of Sword St. Darius. But the problem was that no one dared to make a move. With Brando's strength, how could they oppose him? Thus, there was an awkward silence in the room for a while. Until the sound of a sword being sheathed broke the silence. Brando sheathed his sword and walked slowly into the Garden of the White Rose. After he mocked the Silver Queen, he did not even look at her. He just walked straight to the stunned mountain girl. Scarlet looked at him blankly. Her expression was blank and it was a little funny. She seemed to be under some kind of spell and froze on the spot. Until Brando walked to her side, he reached out and tucked the messy hair in front of her forehead behind her ear. He said to her, "Sorry I'm late, Scarlet." Hundreds of people watched the scene in silence. The nobles of the Empire were speechless. Medicia's eyes were filled with gratification and envy. The Shire and Mephistopheles smiled. Vahina bit her lower lip. Hendrik looked away in boredom. Old Nideven and the Archduke of Flowerleaf shook their heads. They did not show their emotions like the young people, but they did not know what to say. On one hand, they had witnessed the birth of a legend, but the stepping stone was the Empire. If this had happened in Fanzin, even the two old men would have been able to talk about it for a long time. But it happened to be in the Empire. Delphian watched this scene with a complicated expression. Everything she knew seemed to have been completely overturned in the previous moment. At this moment, the Prime Minister's daughter's mind was completely blank. She suddenly felt an indescribable pain in her heart, and even her fingertips turned slightly white. She could not see her inner thoughts clearly, but the shyness on her body gradually faded. After such a long journey, she had quickly matured. When Brando brushed her hair behind her ear and felt the heat from his hand, the mountain girl trembled slightly. She silently lowered her head and leaned against the Lord's warm chest. She began to sob. This was completely out of Brando's expectations. The mountain girl's boldness was like a sharp arrow that struck his heart, but he did not even have time to react before a deep heartache surged into his heart. He could clearly feel how thin and weak the girl was in his arms. Her shoulders trembled slightly, as if countless days and nights of uneasiness and fear that could not sleep had seeped into her heart. The helplessness and sorrow of being at the mercy of others was so deep and heart-wrenching. Only those who had experienced it personally could understand it, and those high and mighty figures simply could not understand it. At this moment, Brando could only think of Erwin, who was burning in flames. At that time, their fates were so similar to this girl's. He and the others who had lost the support in their hearts were even more helpless than Scarlet at this moment. Silently, he could not help but hate the Silver Queen even more in his heart. But it was at this moment that he felt something cold and soft touch his lips. This was not a small matter. Brando widened his eyes and found that Scarlet's arms had unknowingly wrapped around his neck. She raised her head, closed her eyelashes slightly trembling, and the cute fine hair on her cheeks could be seen clearly. Brando seemed to have been hit by a strange magic, and was completely unable to move. Hundreds of imperial nobles watched this scene unfold with their eyes wide open. They looked at the two young people who were kissing, and they were unable to make a single sound. For the nobles, this was such a beautiful scene. A knight saving the princess, perfectly in line with the pursuit of beauty and romance of the upper class of the empire. But what made them feel awkward was that they did not know how to face this scene. They did not even dare to look at Her Majesty, lest she see that their hearts were shaken. Scarlet is so brave. Medicia sighed softly. But even I have to admit, the Shire replied, This is a reward that the Lord deserves, and this miracle is worth a kiss. I really can't say which one is more valuable between the two. Mr. the Shire, please be careful with your words. Medisha glanced at the unruly wizard. Don't worry, I'll keep it a secret in front of the Roman lady. But I don't think she'll care. The Shire winked. This time even Medisha was speechless. Her face was also red. Old Prime Minister Nidevan did not express his opinion. He was rather old-fashioned when he was young, and the previous emperor had taken a liking to his steadiness. However, he was still tolerant and lenient towards young people. The Archduke of Flowerleaf chuckled, as if he was reminded of his own romantic and unruly youth. He patted his daughter's shoulder lightly. What a good lad. Father, Vahina snorted fiercely, I'm running away from home. Running away from home again? The Duke of Flowerleaf could not help but laugh. The girl rolled her blue eyes. As for what she was thinking, it was hard to say. The Silver Queen was also watching this scene. He's completely different from his grandfather. At this moment, the Queen had such a strange thought in her mind. Even the depression and pain from her failure had mostly dissipated. She knelt on the cold marble floor. The reflective floor could almost reflect her beautiful face. It was a face that was not eroded by the passage of time. In that face she saw herself when she was a princess. That was such a good time. Unfortunately, she could barely remember it. When did things start to change? She thought silently. It was a dark and deep corridor. On both sides of the corridor were arched windows, and the arched windows reflected many memories of the past. She saw the wilderness of the Four Realms, the beautiful spring scenery, the sunny courtyard, herself and her sisters, her brother and her father, the great Emperor Grantakri. It was like something that happened in another dream. It was hazy like the moon in the water. She saw countless banners, and the glory of the empire had just begun. Her father passed the throne to her, and she passed it to her brother's first son. She saw the glorious palace, and the empire's territory expanding in all directions under her gaze. Then war broke out, and the knights bravely attacked the army of the undead. Decades later she grew old and her face was full of wrinkles. The empire grew stronger day by day, and she gradually could not remember the things of her youth. However, a flame still burned in her heart. In the end, I did not go against my father's wishes. She stood in the darkness and saw everything that had happened in her dream. Her bare feet stepped on the cold floor and she looked at her old self. She was dressed in white and she was still young, but she was so helpless that it was as if she had been abandoned by the entire world. Why was it like this? She looked at her hands, which were slender and long. Decades had passed and she did not carve a single pattern on them. However, they were so pale that they looked like ghosts. Drip. A drop of cold liquid fell on her palm. Constance realized that she was crying. How many years had it been since the last time she cried? She could not remember. The dreamscape shattered like a mirror. The shining shards cut her skin and blood flowed out, shining with a golden light. However, she did not feel it at all. She finally remembered everything that happened in the distant dream. At the end of the corridor, she saw the mysterious altar. It was exactly the same as it was 60 years ago. Even the furnishings around it had not changed at all. She saw her 16-year-old self, the Dragon Queen Gwendolyn, and that tall and handsome figure. The three of them fell beside the altar. On the altar was a baby girl. Her features were picturesque and she was so perfect that she seemed to be the masterpiece of the Creator. Your Highness, you can't do this. Mr. Darius, this is my fault. I have to take responsibility for it. Do you want to watch the whole world die with us? Lady Gwendolyn, you have to stop Her Highness. Gwendolyn, you are a court warlock. You are responsible for the survival of the Empire. Help me complete this ritual. But, Your Highness, Gwendolyn, there are many princesses in the Empire, but there is only one wand. Your Highness, I have made up my mind. If I can protect the Empire, protect this land that I love deeply, it is also my greatest wish. The Silver Queen looked at her 16-year-old self in a daze. She looked at the Silver Princess of the Empire, and tears fell from her eyes uncontrollably. The memories became so vivid and deep. The fragments of the past that had abandoned her for decades seemed to come alive at this moment. She finally remembered that it was the beginning of everything, and also the end of everything. The scene in front of her began to change. It was a scene from countless eons ago. The meteorites that fell from the sky burned through the clouds, leaving streaks of light in the golden-red sky. Countless people were fleeing across the boundless plains. There were still sporadic battles happening on the elemental frontier. Occasionally, there would be a flash of explosion, dotting the vicinity of the Babel fortress. She saw a giant dragon covering half the sky. Its wings stretched from the south of the Great Plains to the north, crossing the sky. Its curved neck was like a giant tower on top of the clouds. Its entire body was emitting endless pressure. There was a rumbling sound between the clouds, and the shining tower was falling apart. She saw another scene. The blood-red setting sun passed through the 12 obsidian pillars and shone into the hall. The crystal lattice network on the smooth floor shone brightly. A group of people in robes was slowly walking into the hall. One of them raised his head and looked around. There were a total of 13 people around him. They wore the same robes but different colors. I suggest that the Truth Symposium be activated. A voice said. Agreed. The Truth Symposium agrees. The Ring of Ashes agrees. Agreed. The person she saw was wearing a robe with red on the left and black on the right. There was a dark gold collar at the collar, and the robe was wrapped with an Ouroboros. Another voice said. The Silver Eye is in charge of recording the meeting and will not participate in the voting. The speaker was wearing a gray robe with a silver collar. The emblem on his robe was a giant round door. A long and narrow eye grew out of the door, as if it was looking down at the world and everything. A voice appeared in the Silver Queen's mind. The Eye of Quinin, the Silver Symposium. The people on both sides of this person were wearing the same attire, but the emblem on the giant door was different. One was an evergreen spear and the other was a silver scale. The administrator of the Gate of Arbitration is absent. One of them said. Then the judge will not express his opinion. Another person agreed. The arbitration tribunal will withdraw from the meeting. The person in charge of the Silver Eye said immediately. Agreed. The host of the meeting said. The Earth Legion appoints Odin as the plenipotentiary. The two people on the right spoke. They were wearing black robes with golden collars. The emblem was the 7 stars in the ring, but the stars were different. Two voices sounded in her mind. The Dragon of Fury, Alphonse. The Dragon of Wisdom, Crystal. Then, the next moment, the Silver Queen saw everyone looking at her. I agree, she answered automatically. Passed. The host raised his hand. Next we will vote by absentee. Those who object take a step forward. There was dead silence in the hall. All votes. Plan name. Curved surface. Serial number. A973034X. Code name. Wound plan. The voice gradually turned into a buzzing sound. She seemed to be in the middle of a busy market, participating in it personally, but also looking on coldly from the sidelines. Some of the words became clear in her ears, while others became muffled and then intermittent. The Silver Queen stood in the crowd blankly, as if she finally remembered that she had experienced all this herself. That might have been countless years ago or it might have been decades ago. She suddenly felt a little scared and shook her head gently. Lady Martha, no, please. But the light in front of her still lost and everything became pitch black. In the darkness there was the sound of a girl crying. Chapter 1100. It was as if yesterday had reappeared. The deepest nightmare in the dream was an abyss that she would rather die than return to. But at this moment, it was displayed in front of her. Pain had once intertwined in the heart of the young princess. Even after decades of calming down in the heart of the old queen, it was difficult to heal. There was only one monotonous color in the boundless gray field. The air was cold and pungent and gray snow was falling from the sky. But when it fell on her hand she realized that it was a thin layer of dust. The boundless gray dust fell from the sky and landed on the ground, covering everything. The thick dust was knee-deep. There were some trees in the distance. They were also gray, but before they could get close they had already turned into ashes. This monotonous color outlined the outline of this world. The surroundings were empty. There was neither sound nor vitality. The Silver Queen walked forward absent-mindedly, one step deep and one step shallow. Like a puppet, she trudged along the endless plain. There was only emptiness in her eyes. She had long known what she would see, but she could not stop herself from moving forward. Occasionally there was a rumbling sound above the thick and heavy dark clouds. A blood-red lightning flashed through the clouds and zigzagged into the distance along the clouds, lighting up the undulating mountains in the distance. This was the only evidence of the passage of time in this world. She did not know how long she had walked. The world was forever empty until she saw the shadows of some tall hills. There were some corpses of giant beasts. Some were like giants, some were like dragons. Their surfaces were covered in thick dust and they were motionless. Some might still be in the same state as when they were alive. It was as if they had experienced a tragic disaster, freezing the last moment of their lives at the end of time. But they had long been silent. A mountain appeared in front of her. It lay there quietly. It was like a giant dragon. Its whole body was made of cold metal, but the surface of the metal was transparent and shining. It was covered with a crystal grid. She shivered slightly. But she still could not stop her hand from gently touching it. It was cold to the touch. There was no organic matter on the surface, but the giant body responded with a gloomy aura of death and suffocating sadness. Tears rolled down her face uncontrollably. She let out a whimper like an injured beast. The dragon's head was lying flat on the ground quietly with its eyes closed. 2 of its 3 pairs of horns were broken, and its wings were drooping down, covering an area of 100 miles. There were no sounds or words to describe this scene, but the Silver Queen knew from the first moment that it was dead. He was like a god who had entered his twilight and was in eternal slumber. She was so sad that she couldn't restrain herself. It was as if a sharp blade had stabbed into her heart. She couldn't help but cry out loud. 60 years ago, she was here crying like a helpless child. Because all hope was lost. The name of this dragon was Bahamut. It was the king of all dragons, the platinum dragon god, the symbol of courage and hope for mankind. It had protected Wone for tens of thousands of years. But it was dead. Without a sound. With tears and wounds, the Silver Queen finally stopped crying. She bit her lower lip coldly and walked around the mountain of corpses and the huge head of the dragon. She silently walked along Bahamut's cold chin, and then a tragic and desperate doomsday unfolded in front of her without any warning. She shivered and tried hard to stop herself from looking at this scene. The deepest fear in her heart rose. She gasped and couldn't help but lean on Bahamut's body. It was a battlefield. Hundreds of millions of corpses were scattered in it. Huge clusters of crystals, dying dragons, heroic human knights, the bones of griffins, giant insects, elves, dwarves, each maintained the last posture of their lives and stood quietly on this battlefield. It was quiet and cold as before. Then she saw the dragon of war, Tiamat, crystals and Alphonse, Sanglan and many other gods. They were all dead. These great beings had disappeared with the whole world. In the gray and lifeless air, the elements floated wildly, like a bunch of dispersing electric currents, struggling in the wilderness. The laws that bound them had long disappeared. The foundation that civilization and order relied on to maintain was gone. She walked forward numbly until a knight came into her sight. In the middle of the corpses of the 4 elemental kings, the knight stood proudly with a spear in her hand. The green spear in her hand was like an emerald, lighting up the only bright color in this world. But the spear was broken in half, and the knight's heartbeat had been silent for a long time. She had also passed away. That young and immature face was full of serenity and determination, but it deeply pierced the Silver Queen's heart. It was exactly the same as when she knelt in front of this knight 60 years ago. There was only endless sorrow in her heart. No matter how she struggled, she could not change history in the end. The world was still the same as what she saw 60 years ago, sliding into the same trajectory. She had failed. She was too weak to do anything. She suddenly felt how ridiculous she was. She thought she had seen everything clearly, but in the end she was still too stupid. It turned out that this was the sorrow of the mortal world. At the moment when the curtain fell, no one could break free. They were like puppets on the stage, and their fate was never in their own hands. She looked in front of her silently. That was the end of the world. A lonely cliff stood in the void, and flashes of lightning intertwined in the sea of chaos. The elements were falling apart, and the cornerstones of the world fell off piece by piece, collapsing into the billowing clouds. A long whimper came from the chaos, resounding through the sky. A giant beast was cruising in it, its back cut through the void like a towering mountain range. The Silver Queen stared blankly at this terrible creature as it turned its body over, and its giant fins almost swept the world. That was Leviathan, a giant beast that was born in the chaos. Lord Martha. What? The Silver Queen suddenly murmured. At the end of time, this is the inevitable end of our world. I'm sorry, my people. A gentle voice stroked her heart. But I've tried my best to change it. Why? Because the price is too heavy for us. We put our hope in the hands of the Black Iron people. We don't have the power to do it again, but I tried to correct that mistake. If you could, no, I've already failed. She shook her head in pain. Lord Martha, I'm sorry. The mortals stole your authority, but I can't return it to your hands. The mortals stole my authority, but you might be able to choose another path for our world. But I've already failed. She suddenly froze. She spoke with a trembling voice. Lord Martha? The mortals stole my authority, but you might be able to choose another path for our world. The gentle voice repeated. The mortals stole my authority, but you might be able to choose another path for our world. The mortals stole my authority, but you might be able to choose another path for our world. The Silver Queen seemed to have been struck by lightning, and her face quickly lost all color. She trembled and stepped back, and then she bumped into a soft human body. She turned around abruptly and saw the Dragon Queen Gwendolyn in front of her. You haven't failed, Your Majesty. The latter's voice was unusually gentle, and it overlapped with the former's voice. Gwendolyn looked down at her with a slight smile on her face. The Silver Queen opened her mouth, and there was deep fear in her silver eyes. What? The latter stretched out her hands and gently cupped her face and smiled gently at her. You are so innocent and kind. Your heart is pure and flawless. Your Highness, no one is more suitable than you to carry that will. Gwendolyn lowered her head and kissed her gently on the forehead. Good night, my baby. The Silver Queen's eyes lost focus, and there was only endless regret left in her heart. Darkness spread in her field of vision. Your Majesty. Your Majesty. Your Majesty, what's wrong? The entire White Rose Garden was in an uproar. Everyone immediately noticed the abnormality in the Silver Queen, and the order among the nobles seemed to be in an instant. Everyone rushed to the center of the garden in a panic. Under everyone's gaze, the Silver Queen fell to the ground, face up. She looked at the sky in a daze, and blood gushed out from her eyes, nostrils, ears, and mouth. Her eyes were empty, and there was the sorrow of a dying person. Until a person slowly walked out from the crowd and came to the side of the Supreme of the Empire. At that moment, everyone fell silent and involuntarily made way for this person. Your Majesty. The Silver Queen recognized this voice. When she was a young girl, this voice used to be one of the most authoritative voices in the court. It was unquestionable, and it made people feel at ease. More importantly, it was the only memory she had with her father, Grand Attila the Great. It was the empire 60 years ago, glorious and warm. The empire of that era had two voices, as if as long as the owners of these two voices still existed in the empire, the country would continue to be stable and strong. Lord Nydivan. At that moment, Her Majesty remembered a lot. She even recalled the past in St. Cantipi Palace, the memories of every learning under the supervision of various strict teachers. The history of the empire, the glory of the royal family, the faith of the people, were all engraved in her heart. The queen, who was like a young girl, smiled slightly, but she was so weak that she could barely show such an expression. I was wrong. I'm sorry, I failed to live up to my father's expectations. Old Nydivan pursed his lips and he couldn't say a word. He witnessed the growth of the princess with his own eyes, and watched her become the pride of the empire. She was the most outstanding princess of Cruz, and the most glorious and proud princess in the eyes of countless people. He then watched her ascend to the throne and watched the empire prosper under her rule. Suddenly, when he looked back, the gentle and smart princess seemed to still exist in his memory of yesterday. She was sitting next to an arched window in St. Cantipi Palace. The bright afternoon sun passed through the floating dust and quietly fell on her knees. Her eyes were bright and clear, and she carefully listened to the detailed and trivial history and knowledge. Teacher, I hope that the 4 holy cathedrals can return to the era of glory. In the distant future, we will open up a wider territory. Perhaps the civil war between civilizations will be eliminated because of this. I have to prove that what the 4 sages did back then was correct. One day, once we succeed, people will no longer be confused. Old Nydivan suddenly felt that there was someone beside him. He turned around and found that it was the great Holy See Vala. The old man's expression was equally serious. Only then did he remember that the princess was once his student. The Silver Queen quieted down. It was as if she felt Vala's presence. But she didn't speak. She only listened carefully to the wind that belonged to this era. For her, perhaps this was the last time. After a long time, she spoke in a weak voice. I have something to say to Count Tonajol. Old Nydivan and Vala turned around at the same time and looked at Brando in the Garden of White Roses. The latter was comforting Scarlet, and could not help but frown when he felt the two's gaze. In his opinion, the Silver Queen deserved it. Besides, he was not willing to get into trouble at this time. But at this moment, he saw the pleading in the eyes of the 2 old men. The old Prime Minister was fine, but Vala had helped him at a critical moment. He could not refuse the other's request. He patted Scarlet's shoulder gently and came to the Queen's side. When he saw Her Majesty the Queen again, he was slightly surprised. He did not expect the Dragon Queen to act so decisively. The once insufferably arrogant Queen was now so weak that she could barely speak a complete sentence. Her youthful eyes revealed a dying luster, and it was obvious that she would not be alive for long. Her Majesty looked at him steadily, as if she wanted to see the shadow of another person in him. Brando could not bear it and asked, "Is it the Dragon Queen, Your Majesty? Where is that woman?" The Silver Queen shook her head weakly. She reached out her trembling hand. Brando felt a little helpless. Facing the Queen in this state, he found that he could not harden his heart. He could only bow his head silently. Only in this way could the Silver Queen's hand reach his cheek. The slender fingertips gently stroked the face, and gradually overlapped with the impression in her heart. She opened her mouth and said with some difficulty, "Treat the Roman well?" This sentence was like a bolt of lightning piercing into Brando's heart. The hair all over his body stood up in an instant. He stared at the weak Queen, not understanding why she would say such a thing. But the Silver Queen did not answer his question. She slowly withdrew her right hand, took off a ring from her finger, and then pressed the ring on his chest. On the ring was the supreme emblem of the Empire. "Tell your grandfather that I love him." She had never regretted it. This was not something a supreme person should say, but at this moment, no one stood up to criticize her. Only the old Prime Minister Nidevan looked at the Silver Queen's action with his mouth agape. "Your Majesty, you can't. You don't understand." "Prime Minister." The Silver Queen gently interrupted him, "The authority of the mortal world has passed away. Our world needs a hope, and I must make up for my mistakes." A moment later, the ring slipped from her hand. Her Majesty's hand fell gently. She closed her eyes. The thick and beautiful eyelashes no longer moved. In the darkness, she finally remembered how everything had changed. "Darius, you must send the baby girl away. If necessary, kill her. Hurry, I'm afraid I'll regret it." "I will send her away, but Your Highness, your physical condition worries me." "What happened to you?" She just smiled slightly. "I am your knight, you must answer my question." "Madam Gwendolen, what's going on?" the voice asked angrily. "Mr. Darius, the princess is right. The Bugas and the dragon will be here soon. We must arrange everything before then." "Perhaps so, but if you can't answer the question in my heart, you will see my stubbornness." The Dragon Queen sighed. "The power of the baby girl is beyond our imagination. In order to save the princess' life, I divided her soul into two and used her kind personality to seal that existence. I don't know how long this will work. My lady, you'd better be mentally prepared. The princess' temperament may change greatly in the future. I've done my best. Then the Bugas?" Gwendolen's voice trailed off as if all the sounds began to become faint, as if an angel was whispering in her ear. Before the eternal darkness fell, she seemed to see a shining holy sword. She knew. That sword was called Amber. It was the sword that changed the fate of the entire world. P.S. There was a bug in yesterday's article, mainly caused by the revision of the previous article and the omission of this draft. Here to clarify, the Highlander Prince has been reduced to ashes. Secondly, I'd like to talk about the next volume. The next volume is Amber's sixth and final volume. It's tentatively named Throne of Destiny. Amber has been writing for 5 years, and more than half of the plot has been completed. It's about to come to an end. The original intention of this book was to incorporate a yearning for idealism, which is why people often say that this book is overly idealistic. However, I believe that the pursuit of idealism is one of the reasons why human nature is so noble. Looking back in history for thousands of years, regardless of whether the truth that human beings were pursuing was right or wrong, perhaps even if the process was absurd and amusing, the driving force that drove them to pursue their right had always pushed our world forward toward civilization and order. Even if there is a moment of regression, we can always look at the shining point in human nature and let it bring us out of ignorance. Perhaps desire is ugly, but at least we know how to introspect. Chapter 1101. The empire had lost its ruler, and a princess had been laid to rest on the land she loved so much. In the midst of the chaos, Brando quietly retreated. A moment ago he was the center of the whirlpool, but now he was on the periphery. Not many people noticed him except for one noble from Erewhon. Only the old prime minister bent down shakily, picked up the ring on the ground with his hand, and looked back at him, his cloudy eyes full of complex emotions. Brando came to Scarlet's side. He looked up, his eyes sweeping over the Shire, Medisha, and the others, his heart full of emotions. The passing of life was so simple, often in the next moment you did not know who would be with you. He was worried about the safety of the Roman and Hippamera, and the Silver Queen's last words had brought a strong sense of foreboding, like a gloomy ghost. Why would the Empire invite a small merchant on Erewhon's diplomatic list? In terms of business talent, The Roman had just emerged, and in terms of capital, she was far from the big chamber of commerce in Ampere Seal. Brando then remembered that there was indeed something suspicious on the list, but he did not notice it at all, and his heart was full of self-blame. However, he did not think about how inconspicuous it was. Tonajal and Erewhon were no different to the Empire. They were both small insignificant places, but the latter had a lord who defeated the Holy Cathedral of Fire, and the Empire had reason to be curious about everything that happened in this land. The crowd moved slowly, bypassing Brando and Scarlet. The Silver Queen's death could be counted as the two conspirators, but at this moment, no one dared to mention it. The nobles seemed to have forgotten this point. The old Prime Minister did not say a word, so who would dare to overstep their authority? Some people could not even protect themselves. Who could guarantee that the officials and families promoted by the Silver Queen would not be punished after the eldest son took the throne? The Prime Minister was about to return to power. A small piece of pure land appeared in the crowd. Scarlet held the azure lance and stood silently beside Brando, as if she had found a familiar position. He was like a silent guardian. Brando turned around and said to the latter, "Scarlet, where is Miss Ovina?" Scarlet paused, and Ovina's voice came from the azure lance. "I'm here, what can I do for you, sir?" "Miss Ovina, you know what Her Majesty is doing, right?" "There are many answers to this question, and I have to consider how to answer depending on which identity you are speaking to me," Ovina answered seriously. "Is there a difference?" "Of course there is. If you are speaking to me as an ancestor, then I will tell you everything. She wants to reopen the Truth Parliament. If you are speaking to me as the Lord of Abes or the Count of Tonajal, then I will tell you that I have no comment." "Ancestor? Truth Parliament?" Brando thought of the many descriptions of the ancestors in the Pale poem. This term sometimes referred to the divine people, and sometimes it referred to the followers of the ancient kings, the first batch of nobles after the War of the Holy Saints. But the ancestors that Ovina spoke of were more like a proper term, because the divine people did not predate her by much. As for the Truth Parliament, he had never heard of it before. He had heard of the Truth Society, but he did not know the connection between the two. Ovina floated out of the azure lance, like an invisible ghost floating in the air. The people around her ignored her appearance. Her delicate little face was the same as a certain merchant's. She glanced at Brando and said, "The ancestors are relative to the newborn and the mixed-blood divine people. This question is a bit complicated for you, but all you need to know is that they are all divine people. The newborn is the general term for the first 3 generations of bloodline, and the mixed-blood divine people are the descendants of the divine people who were artificially bred and naturally bred. As for the ancestors," she paused. "Legend has it that they were the ones who created this world with Martha, but as for their origins I am not sure." "Then you are saying that I am an ancestor?" Brando asked. Ovina floated up and circled Brando from left to right. She said with some confusion, "Your aura is a bit strange. Although your bloodline is undoubtedly the Iron People, your authority comes from the Truth Society. As far as I know, the divine people who have the authority of the Truth Society are mostly the first 3 generations of newborn. But you are a bit special. You have the aura of Gaia's will. Only the ancestors and Lady Martha are born from Gaia's will." Brando did not catch the main point of this sentence. His attention was caught by something else. "You said the Truth Society?" He thought of the handsome humans in black and red robes he had seen in his dreams. The Truth Society is the central organization of the divine people. They are the leaders of the divine people. The Tribunal, the World Tree Organization, the Earth Army, and the divine people in Gaia's will are all directly under their leadership. The Tribunal, the World Tree Organization, the Earth Army, and Gaia's will. Brando realized that there were more and more terms that he did not understand. Other than the World Tree Organization, he had never heard of any of the other terms in the game. However, after coming to this world, he learned about the composition of the Earth Army. That's not easy to explain. Plus, in my era, the divine people's bloodline had already withered. Much of the knowledge from the previous eras was lost. However, you can understand it as an existence similar to the Pantheon or Hall of Valhalla in the Legends of Mortals. It is just an organization for the divine people to perform their own duties. Then you said that my authority comes from the Truth Society. Is it because I am a planeswalker? Brendel thought for a while, and it seemed like this was the only possibility. She had said that his bloodline was only an iron-ranked bloodline, and the only thing that couldn't be explained by the game system was the planeswalker system. Unexpectedly, Ovina shook her head. The members of the Truth Society are all planeswalkers, but planeswalkers are not necessarily members of the Truth Society. However, you are not wrong about one thing. The best planeswalkers are usually members of the Truth Society. Planeswalkers are the authority given to them by Martha. At first, this authority was exclusive to the Truth Society and the Tribunal. Later, it became more and more fragmented. Even some of the lesser divine people can become planeswalkers. The Odin, Tumen, and Kelsey that you are familiar with are such planeswalkers. Brando was stunned. He even forgot his previous question. Odin, Tumen, and Kelsey aren't the best planeswalkers? Then what kind of people are the best planeswalkers? Ovina smiled condescendingly. Even my previous master, the Knight of the Azure Sky, could only be considered a qualified planeswalker. As I said, only members of the Truth Society can be considered the best planeswalkers. But, no buts. I know you are curious, but you only need to know the history of the first generation of planeswalkers to understand. Although my knowledge is only a small part of the 6 eras, I can tell you responsibly that the first generation of planeswalkers were the people who created this world with Martha. Brando was stunned. For a moment he couldn't say a word. The people who created the world with Martha, didn't that mean they were the creators of the world? Only now did he understand what Ovina meant by the best planeswalkers. Ovina continued, before the 6th era planeswalkers could easily destroy the world and create it again. They also used this method to escape the first few nightfalls. Brando didn't raise too many questions about the 6th era that Ovina spoke of, even though this sentence was already overturned for the average scholar. In the more common chronology of the continent, scholars divided the past of Wond into 3 eras. One was the Chaos Era and the other was the Dark Era. The Chaos Era and the D.R. Era were divided by the Azure Lance shattering the sky. Before that, it was the Chaos Era, and the latter was the era when the Dragon of Darkness ruled the land. After the War of the Holy Saints, the Dark Era ended, and the continent entered the First Era. Therefore, these 3 eras were the common knowledge of scholars. If someone were to say that Wond still had 6 eras before the Azure Lance shattered the sky in front of these people, then they would be looking at them like they were looking at a madman. However, Brando already knew the story before the nightfall in the game. He didn't know exactly how many eras there were, but at least he wouldn't be surprised if Ovina mentioned the 6th era. He was silent for a moment and decided not to dwell on his origins. Instead, he asked, then is the Truth Parliament related to the Truth Society? The so-called Truth Parliament is actually the highest council of the divine people. All the divine people are members of the Parliament. However, this Parliament was initiated by the Truth Society, and the members of the Truth Society are equivalent to the elders of the Parliament. That's why this Parliament is called the Truth Parliament. As if she understood that Brando still had questions, she continued to explain, before the Age of Mortals, the Truth Parliament was permanent, but due to certain events. This Parliament was cancelled after the fall of Babel Fortress. There was only one emergency law left, which is the so-called Article 172. Article 172? Yes, the full name is Article 172 of the United Laws. It states that if 3 divine people are present at the same time, and one of them initiates, then the Truth Parliament can be reconvened. However, this is only a temporary law. The reconvening of the Truth Parliament is only one of the votes. It doesn't mean anything. Then what's the use of it? Brando vaguely understood the cause and effect of the matter. It's mainly used to decide on some urgent issues. After all, the divine people wouldn't know that after the 6th war, our heritage would suffer such a great blow that it was on the verge of collapse. The mixed-blood divine people almost completely lost all knowledge of the past, and the Truth Parliament became a mere decoration. In other words, the Silver Queen somehow received a legacy of the past or at least a fragment of it. She knows about the existence of the Truth Parliament. Brando thought that it was most likely from the final battle or from Odin's legacy. He continued to ask, so she wants to reconvene the Parliament? Ovina nodded. According to Article 172, if she gathered 3 members, then Scarlet and I have no choice but to agree to her request. Scarlet's heritage comes from the Azure Knight, and the Azure Knight is the leader of the Gate of Arbitration. Our authority is to arbitrate and review the divine people's issues. Then it looks like the Silver Queen knows about this as well, or else she wouldn't value Scarlet so much. Ovina expressed her agreement. She nodded and said, but the decision of how much authority to grant is in the hands of Scarlet and me. This meeting can be a meeting with the highest authority, or it can also be a discussion with the lowest authority. Authority? What is authority? All the power of mortals comes from authority. You should understand that other than the witches who can draw upon the power of darkness, mortals are unable to directly draw upon magic power. But in reality, our entire world is built upon order. It was Martha who used the law of Tiamat to restrain the magic power of chaos. She used the elements to reassemble and form the physical world that we see. Of course, energy also follows this restriction. Ovina gazed at the crowd in the courtyard and said slowly, "The knights and sorcerers you see, the power they possess comes from their understanding of the laws. Their understanding of the laws determines how much power they can draw from the web of order and what kind of power they can summon. That's for wizards and high priests. But isn't the power that swordsmen wield physically?" Brando didn't understand. Wizards used the law to draw upon magic, high priests prayed to a higher being to draw upon holy spells, and elementalists used the law to draw upon elements. He could understand that, but what kind of law did swordsmen draw upon? Before reaching the elemental level, swordsmen's power was purely physical. So swordsmen don't have to go through the elemental level? Ovina countered with a question. Not to mention that your muscles, your hair, your bones, and the bodily fluids in your body are all made up of the elements and laws that make up this world. Your physical strength also has to follow the laws of physics of this world, doesn't it? She pointed at the palace knights. These people are usually the lucky ones. Because for mortals, the process of understanding the law is very long. The Black Iron people are born without the ability to wield the power of order. They can only learn and understand the many laws and orders that exist in our world. Many of them can only live their entire lives as mortals. And for the gold and silver people, from the moment they are born, they are often more powerful than many adult mortals. Is this because of the knowledge that came from the embryo? Some races may have this ability, but most of the gold and silver people's reproduction is similar to that of mortals. Where does their power come from? Ovina looked at him and asked word by word, "This is the authority. It is the authority that the law of Tiamat grants to higher beings. They don't need to learn because the understanding of the law is integrated into their blood. It is like an instinct. For some of the higher beings, the authority itself is synonymous with order. For example, the divine people." Chapter 1102. People of the Gods. This term was sacred and distant, but at that moment, it seemed so real and so close. Brando was silent for a moment. He was so engrossed in the conversation that he didn't even notice that dozens of notifications had popped up in his records. His scholar level and several skills and knowledge under it had leveled up by more than 10 levels. But the latter didn't notice it at all. "I understand," he answered. "But Lady Ovina, you once said that I have the authority of the Society of Truth, but I never felt it. My power still comes from learning and accumulating experience, doesn't it?" "Is that really the case?" The spear spirit was a little amused. "How old are you?" Brando was stumped. He suddenly realized that he didn't quite understand this question, so he decided to bring the topic back to something he was familiar with. He thought for a moment, then continued with his previous question. "So what was the difference between the highest authority and the lowest authority that you mentioned before?" "The difference is huge. This determines which level of authority the person with the highest authority can use in the meeting. In the highest authority meeting, the first citizen has unlimited veto power. He can even force the meeting to end." Ovina glanced at him. "Just like you did." Brando couldn't help but feel sympathy for the queen's misfortune. She doesn't know? Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. But even if she did, she wouldn't have known that your authority would be so high. Her bloodline should come from Odin. Odin is the leader of the Earth Army and also an elder of the Truth Society. Their authority is second only to the first citizens. If you weren't there, she could have gotten everything she wanted. What does she want? I'm guessing that she wants to reopen the Truth Society. Brando frowned at the spear spirit. "You've already said that." Ovina shook her head. "What I'm talking about is a permanent parliament just like before the Sixth Era. With a permanent parliament, Babel Tower will stay in the modern world. There will also be first citizens of the parliament who will stay for a long time. The chosen and the promised of your era will eventually grow up and become the next generation of first citizens of the gods, receiving the inheritance from the ancient times." Brando couldn't help but be stunned. Wasn't this great? According to the Silver Queen's plan, if Babelta existed in the world with the increase of the chosen ones, the civilization would eventually recover to a very high level, at least not inferior to before the era of mortals. Wouldn't that be much better than now? Then why was the Silver Queen acting so sneakily? He couldn't help but blurt out, "What's wrong with that?" Unexpectedly, this question made Ovina falter. She deliberated for a moment before answering. "Didn't the Bugis tell you the difference between the era of mortals and the era when gods still walked the earth?" Brando was stunned for a moment, wondering how the other party knew that he had met with Tumen, But then he realized that his alliance with the Bugas was obviously not a secret. He recalled what Tulman had told him. There seemed to be some relevant content in it, but he still did not understand how it was related. Could it be that if the mortal civilization continued to weaken, it would be able to deal with the growth of chaos? It's hard for me to answer that question, Ovina answered. Before the Truth Parliament closed, my master and I were fighting against Dusk and did not participate in the last meeting. They must have made some decisions during that meeting. I can only speculate based on that. But in the end, any question has to face the test of right and wrong, so whether it's good or bad in the end, I have no answer. At this moment, Brendel suddenly thought of Sage Eloranta, thought of the Sacred Covenant, thought of the Buga people who kept everything that happened in the final battlefield a secret. He had a vague understanding in his heart, but he could not be sure. He shook his head gently. In this era of decline, it seemed that it was difficult for anyone to see the future clearly. The Silver Queen might have seen something that forced her to make such a decisive choice, but in the end, she died by his own hand. He asked himself if everything he did was right or wrong. There seemed to be no answer, but at least it wasn't worse than what happened in the game. Regarding this, could he only have a clear conscience? Where should mortals go from here? Perhaps only mortals themselves could answer this question. Then, Brando finally sorted out his thoughts and asked, I have one last question, and it's the answer I want to know the most right now. I want to ask, when the Silver Queen initiated the meeting, did she count me as one of the 3 initiators? Of course not, Ovina answered without hesitation. From what I can see, she never even saw you as an opponent. She cared a lot about Odin's legacy in you, but that's all there is to it. Legacy is legacy, bloodline is bloodline, these are 2 different things. At this point she couldn't help but laugh. But she's a little stupid. If you don't have the bloodline of the divine people in you, why would Odin give you his legacy? If you weren't the chosen one or the promised one, no matter how hard a mortal tried, they wouldn't be able to enter the Truth Parliament. Brando didn't find this funny. In fact, his face darkened. Scarlet was the only one around who noticed the change in her lord's expression. She subconsciously moved closer. Then who was the initiator of the meeting? As a Knight of the Azure Sky, was Scarlet a participant? Brando asked. Of course not, Ovina immediately denied. Although the Knight of the Azure Sky usually participates in the meeting, this time we were there as recorders, not participants. According to the rules, recorders are not allowed to participate in the meeting. If I remember correctly, that Prince Ogios should be a chosen one. Brando recalled. Most chosen ones had their own flaws. That Prince Ogios looked like a maniac. Judging from his strength and performance, it wasn't hard to come to this conclusion. Then other than him and Her Majesty, who was the 3rd participant? I'm not too sure about that, but that person had a very high level of authority, no less than Her Majesty. Ovina shook her head. Is he here? Brando immediately asked. He's not here, but I think he's in this city. Brando took a deep breath. He had a vague idea of a possibility. Why would the Silver Queen know about the Roman? Why would she specially invite the Roman to the Empire? Why was Princess Gloria seen near Bragg's? Also, why didn't his grandfather ever tell him about everything around him? Everything was too much of a coincidence. It was as if a broken chain had been reconnected. The cause and effect of everything automatically appeared in his mind. He felt a little regret. Perhaps allowing the little Roman to come here was a serious mistake. Once he thought about the possibility that the Roman was the baby girl from 60 years ago, and that there was a great secret hidden within her, Brando suddenly felt like he couldn't sit still. He subconsciously wanted to walk out of the Garden of White Roses. But Medisha and the Shire immediately stopped him. Although they weren't standing as close as Scarlet, they were also constantly monitoring their lord's movements. His conversation with Ovina could be hidden from normal people, but as planeswalker creatures who were closely connected to Brando, they could hear it. My lord, you can't go out. My lord, what are you trying to do? It's getting late. Miss Kohua's puppies outside won't recognize you as her master. Besides, who knows what the cultists are up to in the outer city? Medisha looked at Brando's gloomy face and asked in a small voice, My lord, are you worried about the Roman? Brando looked at her and nodded silently. But he couldn't explain all the reasons at once. He was about to speak when a figure appeared in front of him. It was the witch he saw at the Cat and Whisker Inn. He didn't know when she had appeared at the front gate of the Garden of White Roses. She slowly walked through the crowd and no one asked her anything. It was as if she was supposed to be there. The witch came before Brando and looked at him silently. After a while she said, Something has happened to the Roman. You must leave immediately. Brando was stunned. It was as if there was a sharp dagger in this woman's words. When she opened her mouth, it stabbed at the most fearful part of his heart. He took a deep breath before he came back to his senses. He looked at the other party and asked, "Who are you?" The witch took off her veil without hesitation. At that moment, Brando almost thought that he saw several faces. Some of them were even quite familiar to him. It seemed that he had seen them somewhere recently. But in the end he saw the real appearance of the other party. Princess Gloria was not beautiful. Among the excellent bloodlines of the Corcava royal family, she could only be regarded as ordinary. She was far from her niece, Griffine, who had elven blood. But her temperament was rarely seen by Brando. Perhaps it was the years of living as a witch that shrouded her with a mysterious aura. Under this aura, this lady gave people a feeling that was difficult to describe with simple words. Brando had only seen a similar temperament on one person, and that person was now in front of him. She had another name in the countryside of Bucci. The locals called her Lady Isaiah, but in front of the Roman and him, she had always called herself Aunt Jenny. This was a middle-aged woman, but the traces of time left on her face were not many. "Aunt Jenny, you should have guessed who I am," Princess Gloria replied. "Now I allow you to use my real name. What I want to tell you is that your guess is basically correct. The Roman was indeed raised by me. Perhaps you still have a lot of doubts in your heart, but now you must listen to me and leave here immediately." What? Brando froze. The others also frowned and looked at the other party. Among them, the Silver Elf Princess and the Shire had already vaguely guessed the other party's identity. Scarlet and Mephistopheles had a look of vigilance. As for Andrique, she yawned and revealed her sharp canine teeth. "There's no time, but I will explain it to you." Gloria's face was a little serious. "Go find Nydivan and Vala. I want to borrow Cruz's long-range teleportation formation." "They won't agree. That's Cruz's secret." Brando immediately shook his head. Before he understood the situation, he would never leave the Roman behind. "They will." Gloria seemed to turn a blind eye to his attitude. "You are the new emperor of the empire. If they don't want the two emperors to die on the same day." "What? Madam, what did you say?" Not only Brando but everyone around him was stunned. Even Vahina, who had been silent all this time, couldn't help but speak. "The Silver Queen gave you the Ring of Supremacy, so you are the emperor of the empire. Apart from you, no one else can touch this position before you die. This is the rule set by the Flame King Gretel. Even the nobles of Cruz and the Crown Prince can't go against this rule. So go tell Nydivan and Vala, let me talk to them." Brando was silent. He faintly felt that something was wrong, but his right hand was tightly gripping the hilt of the flame blade. Princess Gloria silently watched his expression and shook her head. "Brando, don't be stubborn. You will understand in the future how important what I said to you today is." "Aunt Jenny," Brando hesitated for a moment, but still chose to call her by the name he was more familiar with. But he never dreamed that he would meet the Roman again under such circumstances. "You should understand that I will never abandon the Roman. No matter what happened to her, I will find her." He paused and said with some difficulty, "Even if she is dead, I will at least see the body of my fiancée." Gloria stared at the young man. For a moment she didn't know what to say. "She is not dead." In the end, the former princess of the empire sighed. "I promise you the Roman will be fine, but you have to leave here first, okay?" "No." Brando still shook his head. In reality, he had already planned to force his way past her and go to the outer city to find the Roman. Even though he had only spoken with Ovina for a short while, his heart was already burning with anxiety. But at that moment, someone in the rose garden suddenly screamed, "Martha above, look at the moon." Everyone subconsciously turned their heads and their eyes widened. That lonely black moon hanging in the sky was actually falling. The entire world seemed to resonate with it and trembled slightly. That scene. It was as if the end of the world had arrived. But Brando vaguely felt that he had seen the same scene somewhere before. P.S. I spent a lot of time organizing my thoughts and writing the outline of this volume today, so I wrote it a little late. When I finished, it was already 10 o'clock. Chapter 1103. The dark moon was torn apart in the sky. At first, its speed was extremely slow to the naked eye. People saw the moon slowly split into several larger fragments in midair. They slowly separated, and then dense cracks appeared on the surface of the moon. It suddenly expanded and split into countless smaller fragments. These fragments broke free from the gravitational force between each other and flew in all directions. Such a picture scroll was extremely quiet in the eyes of the crowd at first, but gradually it began to move faster. A few minutes later, the scattered fragments began to penetrate the clouds, pulling out long golden-red flaming tails. It was as if there was a steel rain in the sky. At first there were specks of light, and then golden lines slowly drew out in the sky, densely packed and lighting up the sky. The sky began to gradually become brighter as if the clouds were burning. The light of the meteorite fragments reflected half of the sky into a golden-red doomsday-like color. The golden lines were reflected in Brando's dark brown eyes. The golden-red sky, the meteorites falling through the clouds. He recalled when he had seen such a scene before. It was in the dream of the battle with White. The scene in front of him was almost exactly the same as what he saw in the second dream. A voice boomed in his head. The twilight of the myriad worlds, the twilight of the gods. There was dead silence in the rose garden. The entire capital of the empire and even the Bengal region were shrouded in the bright light of destruction. How could people react in the face of such a scene? Before the end of the world, who could protect themselves? At this time, the larger fragments had begun to enter the clouds, and the thick clouds were suddenly cleared. Like a giant wolf made of light and shadow, they rushed out of the clouds and howled in the air. Their voices were distant and sad, as if they were singing a funeral song for the end of a world. There was a rumbling sound in the air like some kind of magic resonance. The air vibrated and waves of air fell from the sky and hit the ground. With a few cracking sounds, a few long cracks appeared on the ground of the White Rose Garden. These cracks extended all the way to the square outside. The crowd immediately staggered. Only then did most of the nobles react, screaming and looking for cover. Men were pushing and shoving women. The noble women and young ladies were wailing. Angry shouts and voices trying to maintain order filled the air. The scene was chaotic. It was like a drama unfolding before Brando's eyes, but at this moment he was surprisingly calm. It was just like the last battle in the Alkash Mountains, when the undead swarmed into the battlefield like a tide. He didn't have the slightest fear in his heart. He only had thoughts of how to get rid of the enemy in front of him. Black Tea had once said that he was a natural-born warrior. Senior Allium Japonicum had also felt sorry for him when she left. She told him that if he had more resources, a stronger empire, or a stronger guild, his achievements might be even greater. However, Brando didn't care. His sword would only appear for things that he recognized. He turned his head, pointed to the chaotic scene and said to everyone present, "Medisha, you go and maintain order. Find a way to persuade the Flame Family Knight Regiment to open the royal tunnel and let everyone hide in it. The Shire, you go and find Prime Minister Naidivan and the Holy See of Walla. Only they have the authority to control these people. Mephistopheles Andrique, you go and protect the Duke of Flowers and his family, as well as the nobles who came with us and the young man." The Shire, who always liked to make fun of his lord, was silent at this moment. Obviously he understood the priorities. The four nodded and left. Only Scarlet and the three Valkyries were left by Brando's side. Veronica and Lady Sydney went to the nobles. As people of the Empire, they couldn't stay out of the Silver Queen's death. Princess Gloria looked at this scene and shook her head gently. "It's useless to hide there. You have to leave here." Brendel was silent for a moment before he replied, "I won't go anywhere without her. It's useless for you to stay. But if I don't stay, I will regret it." Princess Gloria looked at him steadily. "I'll go with you." "No." Brando shook his head. "I'll go alone." "You can't be willful. Do you know why the Silver Queen gave you that ring? It's just a ring. No one will take it seriously." Brando shook his head indifferently. Even if the old Prime Minister and Walla agreed, what could it prove? The nobles of the Empire couldn't let an heroine rule them. They couldn't change the will of the entire Empire. How many people's interests were intertwined? Princess Gloria didn't argue with him and only replied, "It's not just a ring. You're an adult, Brando, no longer a boy." "It's precisely because I'm an adult. Since you're an adult, you should understand that those things can't be done." "There's nothing that can't be done." Brando hated this kind of aristocratic argument. There are only things that should be done and things that shouldn't be done. For example, going to your death? "It's not going to my death, Aunt Jenny," Brando replied. "I don't want to argue with you. I hope you can do me a favor. If that's the case, then you have to listen to me." Princess Gloria replied without backing down. "No, there's no room for discussion." Brando shook his head. "Aunt Jenny, I don't care if the Roman is the baby girl from 60 years ago, but at least I know that she was raised by you. I believe in the relationship between you and the Roman. The Roman once told me that she wanted to become a merchant so that she could make money and buy you a lot of good things." Speaking up to this point, he suddenly stopped. That somewhat naive girl, perhaps the richest people she saw in Butchie were the merchants who came and went from village to village. He could still remember the time when he and Romaine were haggling with those guys over a small amount of things. Romaine's bag was filled with all sorts of strange treasures, all of which were bought with the money that they had saved up bit by bit. To be able to become a merchant and make money was her biggest dream. Brando felt that something was stuck in his throat, to the extent that he couldn't say anything else. He just looked at the ladder without saying a word. The expression on Princess Gloria's face finally softened. "What do you want me to help you with?" "You have to first tell me what happened to the Roman," Brando replied. "A part of the Dusk Dragon's will is sealed in her body. If this seal is removed, then the Dusk Dragon is likely to take over her body and descend into this world." Princess Gloria replied word by word. The screams of the crowd seemed to be far away at this moment, and the surrounding sounds became illusory. Brando didn't say a word, and the two of them were so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. But the latter didn't say a word, not because of shock. In fact, he already had a faint guess in his heart, but when this guess was confirmed, he still felt suffocated. Back then, the Silver Queen, Darius, and the Dragon Queen Gwendolyn found a baby girl on the final battlefield. That baby girl is today's Roman, but when the three of them found the baby girl was in a dormant state. It was the Silver Queen who inadvertently awakened the latter, and then discovered that the Dusk Dragon's will was sealed in the Roman's body. Gloria continued, "At that time the Dusk Dragon was about to descend, but the Silver Queen, who realized that she had caused a disaster, resolutely decided to sacrifice herself to reseal the baby girl. A seal that can seal the Dusk Dragon's will can be repaired so easily? Besides, a method like sacrificing one's life doesn't seem like something that Her Majesty of that era could understand, right?" Brando suddenly asked. Naturally, someone told her, and this person was the Dragon Queen. "In fact, I've always suspected that the Silver Queen accidentally broke the seal because she was tempted by her, but the Silver Queen is already dead, and I'm afraid only the Dragon Queen can answer this puzzle." "And then?" Brando continued to ask coldly. "But the Dragon Queen only took half of the Silver Queen's soul to complete the seal, using her kind and pure personality to suppress the dark side of the Roman character. According to the Dragon Queen's claim, she did this to save the Silver Queen's life. Just a few minutes ago, she killed the Silver Queen with her own hands." Brando interrupted her disdainfully. Princess Gloria also nodded. "So her statement is not worth believing. The Dragon Queen may have other intentions, but we don't know. The Silver Queen's kind side was used to suppress the dark side of the Roman character. Does this dark side belong to the Dusk Dragon?" Princess Gloria shook her head. "The Roman is the Roman, and the Dusk Dragon is the Dusk Dragon. Although the Roman has the will of the Dusk Dragon sealed in her body, she is a true first-generation divine with a complete soul. It's just that before the Dusk Dragon was unsealed, because of the influence of the will of the Dusk Dragon, the dark side of her character was much greater than that of ordinary people." "But I've never felt it," Brando replied. "In my memory the Roman has never even cried, let alone negative emotions. Generally speaking, this is because of the influence of the kind side of Her Royal Highness. Also, I used a witch's secret method to seal the negative emotions of the Roman, so it's not that she won't cry, but that she can't cry." Noticing Brando's gaze, Princess Gloria smiled bitterly. "It's not what you think. I also have my own difficulties. When your grandfather gave the Roman to me, she was still sleeping in the crystal. Originally, the Silver Queen wanted him to kill the Roman, but the Roman had half of Her Majesty's soul, so your grandfather couldn't do it in the end. Later, I left the Empire with the Roman and came to live in seclusion near Bragg's. But after all, the spells of mortals are not as good as Odin and the Witch Queen. The Roman also slept in the crystal for 40 years. It was not until a year after you were born that the first seal on the crystal began to dissipate. After that, she also woke up and began to grow up like a normal girl, and the seal also began to become unstable at that time. When the Roman was young, she was often controlled by dark emotions. I was afraid that the Twilight Dragon would be unsealed because of this, so I had to seal her negative emotions." "When did that happen?" "When the Roman was 7 or 8 years old." "Impossible," Brando shook his head. "At that time I was already in Bucci. How could I not know? My impression of the Roman is no different from the present." Speaking of this, he suddenly stopped and looked at the former princess of the kingdom in front of him. Gloria showed a helpless expression. "The memories of you, Freya, and the Roman have been modified by me. Because of some things I left you something. After you leave here, you will understand everything that happened at that time. I hope you didn't lie to me this time, Aunt Jenny." "Brando?" Princess Gloria showed a sad expression. "I'm sorry," Brando sighed. I understand your feelings for me, the Roman, and Freya, Aunt Jenny, but this time it was really beyond my expectations. I understand, Princess Gloria shook her head gently. You can go find the Roman. I probably understand your thoughts. Before that, I still need you to do me a favor, Aunt Jenny. Say it. The ring you told me about, the Supreme Ring. If it really has such great authority, then I hope you can help me persuade the old Prime Minister and the Great Holy See of Walla to agree to open the long-distance teleportation circle of the royal family and send Medisha and the others away. Of course it has. Gloria's lips moved. She wanted to tell him that the ring represented more than he thought. The greatest treasure left by the Flame King was not the vast territory and supreme power of the Empire. Any successor with the royal blood in their body could be the Emperor of the Empire, but not anyone could become the Flame King. But in the end she didn't say it. She understood that some things couldn't be forced. That ring, Brendel continued, I'll return it to His Highness after I'm done with it. I have no intention of becoming a king, and I have no intention of getting involved in this whirlpool of disputes. Besides, His Highness is considered my friend. It is His Royal Highness' fortune to have a friend like you, but this ring won't be in his hands. A voice interrupted. Brando turned around and found that it was Lady Veronica. The latter had just returned with a worried look on her face. This matter doesn't need to go through the Prime Minister. I can agree to open the long-distance teleportation circle of the royal family. But I don't think the two lords will object even if they know. Not only Medisha and the others, but also a large number of nobles and envoys from various countries must be teleported away. Otherwise there will be big trouble. Brando then remembered something and said to the latter. Then I'll have to trouble you, army commander. Send my regards to Princess Magadal and thank her very much for her help. Veronica nodded and looked at him silently. You have to be careful too. Chapter 1104. Brendel nodded solemnly to Veronica and then nodded to Princess Gloria who was beside her. Gloria looked at him silently. She had lived in seclusion in Bucci for decades. She had watched the Roman Freya and Brando grow up. Although she was not the parents of these three children, her feelings for them were not inferior. Now that the children had grown up, they had their own choices for the future. Brando, don't force yourself. But in the end he could not help but remind him, you don't understand how important you are to this world. Brando did not answer. If he did, it would only weaken his determination. He turned around and looked at Scarlet behind him. Just as he was about to say something, she unexpectedly took the initiative to speak. I'll wait for you in Tanajul, my lord. Brando could not help but be stunned. He probably never thought that the Highlander girl who had always relied on him would say such words. He thought that it would take a lot of effort to make her stay. It was not that he did not want to bring Scarlet and the others, but because he really did not have the confidence in his heart. The black moon had fallen and the wolf was roaming the world. No matter how he looked at it, this was the sign of dusk. And the meteor in the sky was about to hit the ground. Who knew what would happen? He still had his own unyielding will, but he could not guarantee the safety of Medisha and the others. So this time he did not even plan to bring the planeswalker creatures with him. He entrusted them all to Princess Gloria to teleport them to a safe place. He had already decided to go to the outer city alone. Scarlet looked up at her lord. Miss Roman needs your help. I don't want to be a burden to you. One day I will definitely fight side by side with you. Brando could not help but smile with relief. After going through so many things in his eyes, this Highlander girl had finally grown up. She could finally see her own heart and firmly grasp her fate in her own hands. You will. You used to be the strongest warrior in Abyss. Have you forgotten, Scarlet? I believe that you will be the same in the future. You are the Knight of Azure, no worse than anyone else. Perhaps the next time I see you, you will have lived up to your name in the legends. Scarlet hummed softly. She lowered her eyelids slightly, her heart filled with happiness. Brando looked at everyone in the courtyard, then turned and walked out of the White Rose Garden. When he passed through the main gate, he heard someone call his name behind him. Sir Brando, Count. The voice shouted from afar. I'm Henriette and Bradjet is my grandfather. He was once beaten to a pulp by your grandfather. You may not remember the name, but it doesn't matter. I challenge you to a duel. Remember, you still have Henriette to fight. Conrad pulled his friend back and glared at him. You're crazy. Henriette looked regretfully at Brando's back disappearing into the darkness. He shook his head. Of course I'm not crazy. It's a pity. I still want to find him and make friends. Then why did you challenge him? Conrad was so shocked that he almost forgot about the doomsday scene in the sky. Is there a conflict between the two? Henriette replied proudly. I challenge the Count to protect the honor of my family. Regardless of whether I win or lose as a descendant of my grandfather, I must set an example. However, I admire the Count from the bottom of my heart, and I am willing to form a friendship with the Count. This is my personal matter and there is nothing wrong with it. Even if I die in the Count's hands, it only proves that I am not skilled enough. After a pause, the young man said matter-of-factly, Besides, did you hear what Lady Veronica and the others said? Her Majesty the Queen has given the Ring of Supremacy to the Count. Isn't it a win-win situation to build a good relationship with the future Emperor? No, Conrad shook his head. I think the crux of the problem is that you want a duel with His Majesty the Emperor. Then I will do it before he ascends to the throne. The question was, could the Count really ascend to the throne? Conrad couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Freya felt like she was in a strange dream. The pale full moon, the dark night sky, and the shadows of the black pine forest in the distance. The moonlight illuminated everything clearly. A wooden and stone farmhouse that was common in the countryside of Wuxia, with a barn and a stable beside it. The fields in the distance seemed to be shrouded in a layer of silver. Fields of barley swayed slightly in the night breeze. This was the most common scene in the countryside of Wuxia at the end of summer. But she faintly felt that she had seen a similar scene before, and it wasn't a dream. This memory fragment lingered in her mind, but she couldn't get rid of it. She thought about it repeatedly, but could only come up with some trivial conclusions. It was meaningless. But she knew that she was dreaming. She stood in the courtyard, with the road leading to the forest behind her and the open door of the farmhouse in front of her. She remembered this place. Before the Roman and her aunt moved to the hill where Brando's old house was, they lived here. This place should be behind a small forest outside the village, next to a field. The black pine forest behind her also confirmed her guess. But what she didn't understand was how she could return to this place in her dream. She only had a little impression of this place when she was very, very young. She only remembered that there was a fire here, and then the Roman and her aunt moved to a place further away from the village. But it was strange that most of the elders in the village didn't have any impression of this fire. When others talked about it, they didn't talk about it in detail. It was not that they wanted to hide anything, but it was as if the memory was too long ago and too vague. But after the incident, people said, "Thank God, Martha, no one was hurt." Freya stood in this scene with some curiosity. The memories of Wuxia in her childhood seemed to be something that happened a long time ago. Although she often remembered her aunt's family in her dreams, and recalled the tragic war. But she didn't expect that she would dream of coming to Roman and her aunt's first home the day before the war. This dream was so clear. She felt a little emotional and couldn't help but walk into the farmhouse. She couldn't help but think about what she would see. Would she see the little Roman and Aunt Jenny from that time? She suddenly remembered that she hadn't seen Aunt Jenny for a long time since the fall of Wuxia. Although the people in the village didn't like Roman and her aunt, she had an inexplicable sense of closeness to Aunt Jenny. It seemed to be the same for Brando. In the village, only the 3 children had the best relationship with Aunt Jenny. Unfortunately, Brando would only come to the village every summer. When winter came, he would go back to Bragg's. Before the fall of Wuxia, she had never been to Bragg's. She had only heard about this city from Brando and other people's descriptions. Freya didn't expect that one day she would go to so many places and come to Tanajul, which was so far away from Wuxia. But her nostalgia for her hometown never stopped. With such strange thoughts, she walked into the house quietly. Then she was stunned. The house was a mess. Broken cabinets, overturned tables, chairs, collapsed stairs, and even a wall had collapsed. All kinds of utensils were scattered on the ground. Then there was blood. Bright blood. The moonlight flowed into the house through the hole, illuminating everything. The bright red blood was also quietly reflected on the walls, the floor, and everywhere. She saw 2 corpses with pale skin. One of them was even torn in half, with internal organs scattered on the ground. The other was on the bed with a big hole in the back where the heart was. Freya shuddered. She swore that she had never seen the owner of these 2 corpses, nor had she ever seen anything like this. But she felt a sense of familiarity in her heart, as if all of this had really happened before. She looked around anxiously. A low sobbing sound entered her ears. The sound was full of uneasiness and fear, as if it was so helpless that it made her heart ache. Roman? She immediately recognized the voice and subconsciously turned around. Sure enough, she saw a small figure standing there, sobbing softly. It was the Roman in her memory. He was only 7 or 8 years old, but there was a faint trace of him. Freya suddenly remembered that in her memory, the Roman had never cried so sadly. The only time he saw her cry was when the two of them got lost in the Black Forest. She remembered that time when she slipped and fell into a mountain stream. The scar was still on her back. In the end, it was the Roman who carried her out of the forest. She still remembered that after that, the two of them made a solemn vow that they would never be weak, afraid, and would never cry again. Although it was just a child's vow, Roman seemed to have really kept his promise after that and never cried again. On the contrary, since childhood she had been crying. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but blush slightly. When she participated in the militia training, she didn't know how many times she cried in private because of the poor results. But Freya immediately woke up. She didn't understand what was going on with this dream. Was it just a simple nightmare? Or was it a sign? Witches were superstitious about the power of dreams. Although Freya was not a witch at this moment, she felt that she was sober and not in a dream. She walked over and gently hugged the crying little Roman. She softly asked, "What's wrong?" "I killed my father and mother, Freya." "What did you say?" Freya was stunned. "Where did your father and mother come from? Haven't you always lived with your aunt?" "I don't know. Ooh, what should I do? My father drank and wanted to hit my mother. I don't know what happened." "Oh, Roman, wake up. This is just a dream. Nothing like this has ever happened." The little Roman didn't seem to hear it. She sobbed and asked, "Freya, I killed my father and mother. What should I do?" She suddenly raised her head and looked at Freya nervously. "Freya, will you tell the others? They will come to kill me, right?" "Roman, what are you talking about? You will do that, right?" "Roman, wake up. This is just a dream." Freya subconsciously pressed on the other person's shoulder, wanting to shake her awake. She seemed to have forgotten that she was also in a dream. But just as her hands touched the Roman's shoulder, she saw the other person raise her head. There was no white in her eyes, no pupils, only a dark void. Roman looked at her coldly. "Freya, you are a traitor." "I didn't." "Roman, what's wrong with you?" Freya was shocked. "You are a traitor. Everyone has betrayed me. You're all the same." Roman said coldly. "No, Roman, how could we betray you? And Brando, he will always be by your side." Freya asked carefully, "Roman, what's wrong with your eyes?" But Roman's little face showed a painful expression. "And Brando, where are you?" Just as Freya was about to say something, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her chest. She looked down and saw a gleaming dagger stuck in her chest. She raised her head in disbelief and looked at the little girl in her arms. "Roman?" "You took away Brando," Roman replied faintly. "I'm going to kill you." "No," Freya almost screamed, sitting up from her bed in cold sweat. She raised her head. It was dark all around. She was still in her room in Abby's castle. She froze for a moment, then realized that she just had a nightmare. "Miss Freya?" Su Xiaoxing's voice came from outside the door. "I'm fine," Freya hurriedly replied. "It was just a nightmare." "Haven't you slept yet?" "I can't sleep. Miss Roman has gone to the Empire. There are too many things left for the Chamber of Commerce in Ampere Seal. Miss Roman trusts me so much, I have to live up to her trust." Hearing the word Roman, Freya's heart thumped again. She felt a little uneasy and asked subconsciously, "Is there any news from the Lord?" "No, Mississippi. Since Captain Yuta and the others sent back the news from the Evergreen Corridor, there has been no follow-up." The voice outside the door paused for a moment, then replied, "This is normal. The Empire has long lost control south of the Evergreen Corridor. It's normal that they can't send back news. But Captain Yuta and the others are traveling with our fleet. There shouldn't be a problem on the way." Freya wanted to say that she was actually worried about Brando and Roman, but she thought about it and didn't say it. She silently recalled the previous dream, but suddenly she was stunned. That's... Something in her mind seemed to shatter, and countless dusty memories were suddenly released. Freya's face was pale, and she couldn't help but tremble and lean against the edge of the bed. Brando, Roman, she... Chapter 1105. The fine golden lines in the sky finally connected with the vast horizon. Pieces of the moon fell to the ground one after another. Not only in the Bankel region, not only in the Cruz Empire, but also in every corner of the Wond. Disaster struck at the same time. The burning debris flew over the forest, and the forest immediately turned into a sea of fire. The natives of the forest, such as deer, badgers, bears, and other wild animals, fled in panic. The residents of the town could only watch helplessly as the rats ran into the streets in groups, as if they had gone mad. The dogs were barking wildly, and the stray cats and domestic cats all climbed onto the roofs, letting out strange cries like they were in heat. A beam of golden light streaked across the sky and fell into the horizon. Bang! A spot of light lit up in the distance, and a moment later 2-3 spots of light shone densely together. The shockwave arrived a few seconds later, and the place close to the point of impact vaporized. Anything made of wood, including trees, instantly caught fire. Within a few seconds, everything was completely oxidized and turned into charcoal. Humans and livestock were directly turned into dust. The high temperature licked the ground, and the quartz in the sand immediately crystallized into shining glass. In a place a little further away, the airflow turned into a hurricane and swept through the town, rolling up all the odds and ends. The white iron signboards clanged desperately, and the streets were filled with the screams, shouts, cries, and the sounds of bottles and jars breaking. People saw the airflow rolling up smoke and dust several miles high. Lakes and rivers were sucked into the sky by the hurricane, and then fell back down. Dead fish splashed on the roofs. In some places, when the burning debris swept across the sky, thousands of miles of swamps and lakes were evaporated. The hot air rapidly rose and then fell down as torrential rain and hail. The temperature of the ground rapidly dropped, and in the blink of an eye, it was covered in ice and snow. A blizzard whistled as it attacked. In Luokeki, the cult of the Black Flame even came out to celebrate. But soon, the local garrison was alerted, and the two sides fought fiercely until rivers of blood flowed. The largest meteorite flew over the heads of both sides, and the high temperature ignited everything that could be ignited. Even the metal turned into liquid and fell to the ground, and then solidified again. The robes of the cult of the Black Flame were mostly made of linen, so the ignition point was even lower. Balls of fire rolled on the ground, wailing, or ran all over the street. The water wells had long evaporated, and even the whole street looked like a scorched hell. The destructive shockwave took away everything in an instant. The meteor crashed into the border of Broken Sword Mountain Range, and the explosion triggered a terrible geological disaster. A volcanic eruption followed by an earthquake. The ground sank and the mountains and rivers moved. Everything within a radius of thousands of miles was turned into ruins. Villages, towns, humans, and livestock were all buried. Half an hour later, a brand new rift valley appeared on the map. It spanned hundreds of miles and even caused the sublime inland sea to flow backwards, forming a future lake. The Rock Keki province had completely disappeared from the empire's map, along with the 1.3 million people living there. But in Erewhon it was a different story. Freya, who was awakened by a nightmare, heard the screams in the yard outside. She put on her clothes and opened the window. It was 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, but the sky was shining with a fiery red light. Bright spots of light pierced through the clouds, falling towards Menta, Radnor, and the Erek Highlands in the north, or Karsuk, Grinoires, and Viro in the east. A large flare was splitting the clouds overhead. The golden-red clouds were like flowing oil, cut in half by a blazing hot knife. The flare extended in a radial direction, heading straight for the Black Forest in the south of Abes. As it swept past the Greyhar Ridge, sparks of fire appeared on the mountain. The servants ran around the yard like headless flies, shouting and yelling. The maidservants were carrying basins to fetch water because the stable was on fire. Freya frowned as she stood by the window, shouting, "Bring my horse out, I'm going to see the princess in Valhalla. The rest of you organize people to put out the fire. The rest of you open the cellar. Let the women and children hide underground." Just as she finished speaking, a strange scene appeared. Amidst the mountains of Chablis, above a lake surrounded by a tranquil forest, a pillar of light rose from the center of the lake and shot into the sky. Then, south of Trentheim, in the direction of the Loop of Trade Winds, a second pillar of light rose. Near Brags, in the valley where the saint's legacy was, a third pillar of light rose. Then a pillar of light rose from Cipher, Grey Mountain, Corvado, Radnor, and Lantanailan. 8 pillars of light shone in the night sky, supporting the sky above Erewhon. A moment later, a series of dense flashes exploded above the clouds, and the falling debris seemed to have crashed into an invisible barrier. In the sky above Coldwood Castle, a golden ring of flame was spreading out. The sky was rumbling and the falling meteorites were being torn apart. Then a series of even denser explosions sounded, and the clouds seemed to have been ignited. Strong winds blew down from the sky, and the sound of tiles falling off could be heard from the castle. The black pine forest in the surroundings was like a wheat field in autumn, falling to the ground. The servants were stunned by the miraculous scene in the night sky. Freya was also speechless for a long time. She ordered the servants to bring her horse out, closed the window and returned to the house. Sue opened the door and walked in. She had folded her military uniform in her hands. Freya looked at her gratefully and took the clothes from her hands. She changed out of her nightgown and said, "Thank you, Sue." Sue went behind her and used her hands to lift up the goddess of war's long hair, carefully braiding it. This was a trivial action, but Sue's hands were extremely nimble. When she braided the hair behind Freya's ears, she stopped. Freya felt her actions and asked, "What's wrong? Will we die, Miss Freya?" "Everyone will die. Nobles, generals, ministers, merchants, and servants, there will be a day when they cannot escape the judgment of time. My father once said that after a person dies, they will gradually lose themselves. Their names will gradually fade from the memories of their loved ones, and in the end they will completely disappear from this world. I had many relatives when I was young, but they all died. I don't even remember the names of most of them. Miss Freya, if I die one day, will you remember me?" Freya turned around and looked at this Redo's daughter. "Why do you think that?" She then thought of something. "Is it because of the undead invasion? Recently, I have often dreamed of me and my father escaping from Fortress Reden. That was indeed a terrifying experience, but thank you for saving me, Sue." Sue stared blankly without saying anything. After a long silence, she finally said, "I like you, Miss Freya." "I also like you, Sue. Haven't we been friends for a long time?" Freya smiled faintly, but she immediately became silent again. She thought of the scene in the nightmare and felt extremely worried. Sue continued to braid her hair silently. "Sue, you braid my hair so well. I'm almost used to having you by my side." Freya suddenly thought of her aunt's family. Yes. Half an hour ago, the first meteorite finally hit Lushta, the 1,000-year-old capital. The debris carried a long tail of flames and high temperature as it spun and fell outside the city, completely evaporating a nearby river. Then the resulting shockwave hit Lushta's white wall that was more than 10 miles away. After 1,000 years, Iroma's protection once again protected the city. A bright halo lit up on the white wall, blocking nearly 2/3 of the impact. The remaining shockwaves scattered into the city, directly turning half of the southern part of the city into a barren land. The 3 canals in the city immediately boiled and evaporated, hot steam rising into the sky. Great flames were ignited everywhere, producing roiling smoke that mixed with the water vapor, enveloping the skies above the entire outer city. In the Shoemaker district, next to the Dud River between the 16 and 19 Oaks, there was a seafood store called Hippied. The owner of the store was a country bumpkin named Hill, a title that mixed with the pride of the imperial capital's people. He mainly dealt with the transportation and management of seafood between the sublime inland sea and the imperial capital. Because he monopolized the business of the nobles, he was rather famous. When the disaster happened, this famous old store was like most of the stores on this street, turned into a sea of flames. Under creaking sounds, it collapsed with a loud rumble. Fortunately, the store owner went to the White Maple Forest for a vacation that night, luckily escaping this disaster. The fire burned for a few minutes. The stone door of the nearby cellar was pushed open by a small gray hand. A little boy crawled out from inside. When he landed on the ground, he couldn't help but jump up from the heat. Behind him, a tall young man crawled out, followed by a girl with thick eyebrows. The 3 of them took out pots and pans and other utensils from the cellar, hurriedly ran to the nearby Dud River to fill them with water, and then started to put out the fire. After the fire was put out, they hurriedly turned over the burning bricks and wood, and took out all kinds of seafood that were mostly cooked and roasted from the ruins of the seafood store. These seafood were filled to the brim with a few wooden boxes, and then they crawled back into the cellar with the boxes. At the moment, there were 7 or 8 people sitting in the cellar, both men and women. One of them was wearing a black robe of the secret society. He was a young man with curly hair and sweaty forehead. The thick hood of his robe was pulled down. When the girl with thick eyebrows climbed down the ladder, he was still loudly preaching to the others, "Lady Aroma has arrived. The flames of vengeance will surely evolve everything." The girl with thick eyebrows stood on the side with a box in her arms, listening to the speech with great interest. Behind him was the tall young man. When he came down, he glared at the young man and said, "Shut up. How can you tell me to shut up?" The young man said angrily, "Are you the Queen's lackey? Old Granny is a believer of the Holy Cathedral of Fire. She has been a devout believer of Lady Martha for 80 years. If you say such nonsense in front of her again, do you think I won't throw you out?" The tall man said calmly, "Don't forget who took you in. We're just staying here temporarily." Someone said unhappily, "Then you're going out now?" The person who spoke immediately fell silent. They did not come in to avoid the meteorites, but were chased in by the wolves summoned by Ko Hua. They did not expect to survive. Old Granny Ajis was usually regarded as an enemy by them because of her devout belief in the holy cathedral. But when they were first let in to take refuge, this old woman in her 80s, who had long been blind, did not say anything unnecessary. She only asked her grandson to open the cellar door. Everyone knew that this old woman's son had also died in the war in the south not long ago, and she and her grandson depended on each other. The owner of the seafood store pitied them and let them stay in the cellar for free. And being at the bottom of society in this era, it was impossible for them to be picky about their living conditions. The little boy was the last to climb down. Looking at so many people in the cellar with his mouth closed, he seemed a little shy. He silently walked to his grandmother's side. The latter smiled and patted him on the back. "Go get everyone some water." "There's not much water left, old Granny Ajis. The river outside is almost dry." The tall man frowned. "We have to drink water. There's always a way. Go, everyone's mouths are dry." The old woman's pair of turbid eyes stared straight at the air in front of her as if there was something there. Her wrinkled face smiled slightly as she replied. The tall man did not say anything. He was old Heathcliff's apprentice, and the girl with the thick eyebrows was the daughter of the owner of the seafood store. The two of them actually had nothing to do with the old granny. The water was stored in a dried mud vat, and it was only a third full. The little boy stood on his tiptoes and scooped up a ladle for each of them. The tall man saw that the boy was struggling and walked over to take the wooden ladle. He poured half of the water in the ladle and handed it to the secret society clergyman. The latter glared at him but did not dare to do anything. He silently took the ladle and drank. Everyone was silent as they drank the water in silence. When Hippamera opened her eyes, this was the scene she saw. "You're awake?" The girl with the thick eyebrows kept staring at Hippamera. In fact, it was hard not to notice such a delicate person. She had a head of beautiful golden curly hair, skin as white as porcelain, lips as red as cherries, and a sharp nose dotted with faint freckles. She was playful and cute. She saw Hippamera blink her eyes and open them slightly. Her eyes were drowsy, and her long eyelashes were as thick and neat as brushes. She could not help but marvel at Hippamera's beauty. Heavens, how can there be such a beautiful person? She must be the daughter of one of the nobles in the inner city. The girl with the thick eyebrows thought to herself. What is this place? Hippamera was in a daze and asked weakly. Fortunately, she at least remembered what happened before she fainted. She was injured while escaping from the pursuit of the Dragon Queen Gwendolyn, but she did not know why she had suddenly abandoned her. Chapter 1106. An old voice came from the darkness. "This is old Mr. Hippie's seafood store. You were injured, it was my grandson who found you." The one who answered was old Mrs. Ogis. Although she couldn't see, her ears were extremely sharp. She turned her head and kindly comforted Hippamera. "You don't have to worry, little girl. You can stay here at ease. Your family will definitely come to find you soon." Anyone could see that Hippamera's clothes and appearance were like that of a noble family's daughter. After Hippamera heard this answer, she stared blankly for a long time before finally finding the main point of this question. She asked, "May I ask where this seafood store is?" The girl with thick eyebrows raised slightly, as if she finally found a chance to interject. She hurriedly replied, "The seafood store is a place where seafood is sold. My father manages the seafood trade in the entire city of Rushta. The seafood on the table of every noble in this city is sent out from here." After saying that, she added with some pride, "Maybe the seafood you ate at home is a product of my family." Seafood? Poor Hippamera, this pious priestess Himalud who was born in the mountains, was hearing this trendy term for the first time. The girl with thick eyebrows thought to herself that this was really a young lady who didn't do physical work and couldn't distinguish between grains and vegetables. But strangely, she didn't feel disgusted at all in her heart and even had a bit of a good impression. She replied, "It's fish, shrimp, crabs and other seafood." Hippamera immediately sobered up and asked with wide eyes, "You actually eat shrimp and crabs?" Of course, the blue lobsters of Cloak Bay and the sea crabs of Fista are all top-quality seafood. The girl with thick eyebrows carefully explained. But Hippamera didn't seem to hear and muttered to herself, "You actually eat shrimp and crabs? How terrible, they are friends of humans? What?" The daughter of the seafood store owner was stunned. Hippamera looked at the box the little boy was holding in the water with some sadness. She had already seen a lot of friends of humans inside. The young girl's heart was grieved to the point of speechlessness. The girl with the thick eyebrows was at a loss for a moment. She didn't know why, but when she saw Hippamera's depressed face, she felt very sad. She quickly comforted her. It's not a big deal if you don't like to eat lobsters and crabs. Cod and sardines are also very good. I'm fine. You don't have to comfort me. Thank you. Hippamera heard the comforting tone in the latter's voice and replied softly, also, it's prawns. Not just prawns, they are all friends of humans. The girl with the thick eyebrows was stunned again. For a moment she was speechless. No matter how hard she racked her brain, she couldn't figure out why shrimp and crab were friends with humans. At this time, Hippamera sat up on the bed. She lifted the quilt and cast a healing spell on herself. A ball of light appeared in her hand and merged into her body, healing the wounds on her body. The seller suddenly fell silent. You are a priest? The girl with the thick eyebrows felt that her brain was about to overload. She never dreamed that they would pick up a priest from the holy cathedral. In the eyes of the commoners, a high-grade believer who could cast holy spells had a status higher than that of the aristocrats. Hippamera looked puzzled at the group of people in the cellar who were staring at her, and replied doubtfully, yes, I am a priest of Lady Himalud. The seller was silent for a moment. Martha, bless you, lady, you are a priest. I didn't see wrong, did I? Lady, you just cast a profound holy spell, right? Lady, you must save us. It seemed that in an instant the crowd burst into a clamor. Hippamera was startled and quickly replied, a little bewildered, you are mistaken. That is not a profound holy spell. It is just a healing spell. It is just a second circle spell. It is just a healing spell. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Perhaps in the eyes of others, there were hundreds of people in the empire who were in the supreme realm and elemental level, thousands of people above the gold rank, and countless people above the silver rank and black iron rank. They could not help but have an illusion that there was no existence below the black iron rank in the empire, and that even the commoners were at least at the level of white rank or above. But in fact this was a misunderstanding. The huge number of strong people in the empire was based on its equally huge territory and population base. In fact, in terms of the number of geniuses in 100 people, the empire and Fanzan were far less than the Wind Elves, and were not much higher than Erewhon. And for the Holy Cathedral, there were many existences above the black iron and silver rank, but they were often an important part of the soldier monks and the army of the church. Those above the gold rank were at least high-grade priests in a region, and when they reached the elemental level, they would at least hold the position of bishop. For the commoners, the most they saw was a priest in charge of a church or a regional holy cathedral. In fact, the strength of the priests was at most at the silver rank. As for the commoners, they ranged from the white rank to the black iron rank. Therefore, to them, priests were already high-ranking members of the clergy. However, these people's magic power was limited. If they could use substitutes, they would rarely perform miracles. Therefore, their knowledge of pharmaceutics might sometimes far exceed their knowledge of religious studies. As for a mere healing spell, it was even more impossible to talk about. So because of this sentence, Hippamera's position in the hearts of the commoners suddenly rose a lot, not to mention that her appearance was a plus point. In the eyes of the 7 or 8 commoners in the cellar, this goddess-like young lady was already the savior in their hearts. Sir, please take us away from here. That's right, my lord. You must save your believers. The commoners all started to discuss, but the big guy at the side couldn't help but snort. A moment ago, these people were still the faithful followers of the secret society, and now they were the most devout children of Lady Martha. It was not difficult for them to change their beliefs at all. Even the young secret society clergy in the black robes silently shrank back, not saying a word. What a joke, he was just an ordinary priest. If Lady Martha found out that he was a heretic, she would send a bolt of God's lightning down and turn him into ashes. Of course, the spell God's lightning was just a figment of his imagination. So far he had not officially started to learn black magic. The bishop taught him a spell. It was said that as long as he meditated on this spell, he would be able to hear the call of the Lord. But he had not succeeded even once. Hippamera was confused and quickly said, "Everyone, please be quiet. What's going on?" Only then did the crowd scramble to explain the current situation in detail. They knew in their hearts that they did not know what was going on outside, but it did not seem to be anything good. Although they could hide in this cellar for a while, it was not a long-term solution. Not to mention the long term, there was not enough water and food for 7 or 8 people. At most 2 days, if the chaos outside did not end, their situation would become very bad. Although these people were fanatical when they participated in the riot, they were sober after the meteorite fell. They understood that at this time, the safest place for them was the place controlled by the Holy Cathedral of Fire. And this noble young lady in front of them was undoubtedly the most suitable person to lead them. Due to the messy conversation, it took Miss Priestess a while to understand what was going on. But contrary to everyone's expectations, she didn't make a judgment right away. Instead, she furrowed her thin eyebrows and said, "What's going on? It sounds like it's descending. Miss Priest, what did you say?" The crowd obviously did not understand. Hippamera shook her head. "If what you said is true, the current situation is indeed quite dangerous. But I'm going to find the Lord. Where do you plan to go?" "My lady," someone quickly said, "we don't have to follow you, but can you take us to the nearest holy cathedral? There is a priest there, he will definitely be able to protect us." "That should be fine," Hippamela replied after some thought. She didn't know the way, so it was a good idea to ask someone for directions. "Although I'm the priestess of Himalud, everyone is bathed in order, so I think it should be fine." She asked again, "Where is the nearest holy cathedral?" "I know." At this time, the big man who had not spoken until now replied, "Miss Priest, I will lead the way for you." "That's good, but let's agree that I am only responsible for sending you to the holy cathedral. I still have to find the Lord," Hippamera said carefully. The crowd quickly nodded and agreed in unison. In fact, they were collecting food with the intention of going to the nearest holy cathedral to seek protection. Now that there was a high-ranking priest who was willing to protect them all the way, this was undoubtedly the most exciting news. The old grandmother was also happy. She originally planned to stay alone, but under the persuasion of the crowd, she decided to go with them. After all, there was nothing to be dissatisfied about not being separated from her grandson. Besides, everyone knew in their hearts that staying here was just waiting for death. The old woman did not want to be a burden to them. Of course, under normal circumstances, it was indeed difficult for them to bring an old woman with limited mobility. But now that Hippamera was in the team, it was another matter. The little boy still did not know what was going on, and he did not know that he was almost separated from his grandmother. After receiving the ladder's instructions, he climbed up the ladder and opened the stone cellar door above the cellar. The originally lifeless atmosphere in the cellar could not help but become a little lively. Everyone started to pack up their things, packing up water and food and bringing them with them. In this period of time, to the commoners, these were the most precious treasures. After all, no one knew what was going on outside and how long the turmoil would last. Although Hippamera wanted to look for Brando, she was not in a hurry. Instead, she looked at the actions of these people curiously. In the era she lived in, the Earth Holy Cathedral was still active in Wonde. That was before the era of the War of the Holy Saints and had a history of at least 1,000 or 2,000 years. Moreover, she was the saint of the Earth Holy Cathedral and did not know much about these low-level things. She could not help but be filled with interest upon seeing this. However, before everyone was ready, the grandson of old grandmother Ajis jumped down from the ladder and said softly, "There are people outside." The cellar instantly fell silent. The big man asked, "How many people?" The little boy threw a glance at the secret society's priests who were standing in a dark corner behind them and said, 7 or 8 people like him. It's the secret society's disciples." Everyone suddenly became nervous. Although they were still the most fanatical believers less than an hour ago, their minds were now clear, and their survival instinct took over again. Who knew if these secret society's disciples would have a conflict with the priestess? This was their only hope. These commoners could not tell the difference between the priestess of the Holy Cathedral of Fire and the priestess of Himalud, but they did not think that she would have a good relationship with the secret society's disciples. It had to be said that although the commoners living at the bottom did not have much knowledge, they had simple values and political views. After they analyzed the pros and cons, they immediately said to the little boy, "Quickly go and close the cellar door again. It's too late." The little boy shook his head vigorously. "When I came down just now they already saw me." "Sai, how can you be so careless?" Everyone suddenly felt distressed. Looking at their expressions, Hippamera could not help but feel a little worried. She was not as heartless as the Roman, nor was she as clear as Brando about the hierarchy of power in this world. Besides, there was a horseshoe beetle, a dragon queen, and so many supreme-class masters in the city that could threaten her. She did not know who these secret society's disciples were, and for a moment she was a little nervous. While she was worrying, a series of messy footsteps came from above the cellar. Everyone suddenly fell silent, only the eyes of the young secret society's disciple were a little bright. Of course at this time he did not dare to say a word. Although his fellow disciples were above, the priestess was still in front of him. It would only be a matter of minutes before she turned him into ashes. At this time he was still thinking about the priestess's thunder. The atmosphere in the cellar could not help but be a little strange for a moment. Everyone had different thoughts in their minds. The footsteps above were getting closer and closer. They chaotically crossed the open stone door of the cellar and went in another direction without stopping. Everyone was stunned. The joyful expression that just showed was also frozen on the young secret society's disciple's face. For a moment he did not know how to close his mouth again. His face almost twitched, looking very strange. Fortunately no one noticed this. Hippamera looked at them and asked, "What do we do now?" "Let's wait," someone said. "Let's wait." The others quickly responded. No one dared to take the risk at this time. Chapter 1107. Her emerald green eyes reflected a thin golden trajectory as it fell into the horizon. A wind blew in the forest, and the shadows of the canopy in the distance surged and the leaves danced. The leaves of the March laurel fell on the balcony and blew into the inner palace. Light flowed into the main hall, illuminating the marble pillars. Eloranta watched all this quietly, while the left and right quietly looked at their great sage. This seemed to be faintly announcing the end of an era, but few people understood what it meant. After a moment of silence, the former suddenly walked down the steps, the hem of her silk robe spreading across the marble floor. She turned around and said to the two popes of Fanzan, "Your Majesties, it is time. The prophecy of the past is now. Perhaps we will be destroyed or the world will be reborn, but mortals will have the power to decide." The great sage bowed slightly and said, "Your Majesties, please lend me a hand." "This is our duty," the former pope hurriedly replied. "Please rest assured, the empire will always follow the will of Lord Fanzan, great sage." The current pope also added, "The envoy is already on the way, great sage," but he was a little hesitant. "But I am worried about the wind elves. They will agree they have a 1,000-year-old monarch now." Eloranta smiled gently as if thinking of an old friend. She turned around and walked out of the balcony, the wind pulling at her robe. There seemed to be an invisible door outside the balcony, and when she walked through the door, her figure gradually faded. Then it gradually disappeared. In many places in the wilderness of the Four Realms and the Starry Forest, the disaster had completely changed the elegant and calm attitude of the natives. A meteorite fell on Quillings, destroying half of the court that the Wind Elves were so proud of. The whole city fell into a hellish situation, and cries and screams resounded through the sky. At the highest point of the Temple of Star and Moon, looking into the darkness in the distance, the city was full of sparks and thick pillars of smoke. The elves all looked at this scene with solemn expressions. But Saint Tassol, the Wind Empress, who was standing in front of the 12-pillared hall, looked calm. 24 knights stood quietly beside her. The hunter siblings who were dressed in elven attire followed behind her. Until today they were still not used to the elven attire, which was considered decent by the elves. The current king of Corona followed behind these people in fear and trepidation. He was unwilling to give up, but there was nothing he could do. He only heard the sage saying to the envoy not far away in a firm tone, "Don't worry about it. The Wind Elves will ally with Fanzan." "My lord." The envoy's voice was trembling. He had never dreamed that he would actually meet a sage. That was such an honor, the most noble existence in 1,000 years. "I will convey your every word," he replied respectfully. The elven lady nodded. "Go back and tell your emperor to prepare for war. This war may decide the fate of all of us." Her voice drifted away with the wind, as if it had drifted from the forest to a place further away. There were mountains and rivers, plains and lakes. It crossed the straits, crossed the peninsula that broke out into thousands of miles of raging waves, and followed the seasonal wind called Verdant, followed the sea currents and came to a place called Roshar. The wind whistled all year round, rolling up sand and stones through the canyon, carving out countless strange pillars in the sand. In the huge and strange palace on the cliff, the shadow of a dragon danced. In one of the rooms of the thousands of palaces, a young golden dragon was resting his chin on the windowsill, looking at this scene in boredom. "Alas!" The voice of the elder came from outside the door. The little female dragon grabbed a golden cup and threw it out. There was a series of clinking sounds outside the hall. The elder's voice became flustered. "Damn it, you attacked the members of the Senate again. If this goes on, you won't be able to reach adulthood, alas." "For you." Alas pouted. Her huge body turned into human form in a burst of golden light. She used her hand to fiddle with her huge curly hair, her golden eyes were full of bored colors. She had been locked up for months. "You dare to bribe a member of the Senate. Don't come again. Then I'll accept it. I just want to tell you that accepting bribes is something even in the dragon race. Oh my god, you've smashed my beloved golden cup. If I'm not mistaken, this is the collection of Otto II. The voice outside the door made a fuss. An old man with a white beard that dragged on the ground came in with a golden cup. As he walked, he stroked a dent in the golden cup and sighed. I have good news for you, Alaz. You have to tell me first what's with the chaos outside. I don't know. Maybe Lady Ovanlos is summoning the Dragon Council. The little old man looked around. Where's Flora? She's angry with me. I gave her earring to a mortal. The little old man replied nonchalantly. The relationship between the dragons was very messy. Otherwise, there would not be so many dragon descendants in the mortal world. You're an adult, Alaz. What did you say? The little female dragon almost thought that she had heard wrongly. Then she screamed and jumped 3 feet high. She rushed over like a whirlwind and excitedly grabbed the latter's white beard. What's going on? Say it again? Oh my God, let go. The little old man shouted in exasperation. He reached out and flicked his hand. Alaz flew out like a cannonball and crashed through one of the walls of the palace. She crawled back out of the smoke and dust with difficulty. She looked at the old man with a dusty face and stuck out her tongue. What's going on, Lord Toolworth? The Holy Temple suddenly received a promise from Bahamut. From today onwards, the younger generation of the dragons will directly become adults. When you have your coming-of-age ceremony, you can directly feel the ancient will. Alaz's golden eyes lit up. The gods are back again? That's not it. This promise is not known if it came from outside the elemental frontier, or if it was left behind before. The priests are already in an uproar and are investigating. The little old man replied. The little female dragon licked her lips. So there's a war? The latter nodded. Alaz raised her head and looked through the window. The shadow of the dragons was passing over the sky. In the holy temple of the dragons, a majestic voice was echoing repeatedly. Go to cruise. Brando Freya, where are you? A small, fearful voice suddenly flashed across Gwendolyn's mind. The Dragon Queen paused and abruptly turned to look behind her, puzzled. There the entire street was ablaze, with embers darting out from every window and door. Sparks rose and danced amidst the thick smoke. From time to time the sound of buildings collapsing could be heard. Creaking sounds were heard, but the small voice seemed to be an illusion and never appeared again. She narrowed her eyes, and her pupils reflected the road surface that was illuminated by the fire. It was as if all the water had evaporated from the soil. The hot air flowed through the streets, and the air seemed to be distorted, forming sparkling ripples. The high temperature did not make Gwendolyn feel uncomfortable. Humans often rumored that dragons lived in volcanoes because dragons flew in the sky and burned everything in their path. Although this theory was full of low-level fallacies in the eyes of scholars, it was not a big deal. Ice and fire, air and earth. It was an extreme elemental environment for mortals, but dragons could draw nutrients from it. That was why humans would often find their traces in extreme environments such as volcanoes and icy peaks, swamps and mountains, leading to such misunderstandings. And for an adult dragon like Gwendolyn, it would not be a big deal even if she were to roll around in magma. Of course, unless their brains were fried, they would not really do that. Dragons also pursued comfort and a good living environment just like how they pursued wealth. In comparison, their ecology was more similar to the merchants of Moria, greedy, selfish, and greedy for pleasure. A dragon like Gwendolyn was considered an anomaly among the dragons. Just like how their own kind did not understand why they were always running around outside, there was only one reason for dragons to run around: to kidnap a princess of a kingdom and extort the king's treasury. Gwendolyn's gaze carefully searched every corner. She was a meticulous person, or perhaps a meticulous dragon. Years of living had cultivated such meticulousness, but she still found nothing. An illusion. The Dragon Queen frowned and looked at the square before her. It was the 12-month square. The square was designed and built in the year of the return of radiance. The designer was the dwarven master craftsman Hazeth Steelaxe. Of course, the square had been changed and rebuilt over 1,000 years. Even if the designer himself climbed out of his grave and came here, he might not recognize his masterpiece. Not to mention the square at this moment. Even the street guards from the day before might not recognize it. The ground in the square was blood red, just like the hills and basins that Gwendolyn saw in Billord. The soil was rich in some kind of metal element, and the ground was bright red. However, the ground had cracked under the high temperature like a dry field. The Dragon Queen walked slowly on the dried blood scabs, and the sound of cracking bones sounded like she was stepping on broken bones. The statue of Duke Knight Duke had completely collapsed from its pedestal. The stone statue lay in pieces in the middle of the square. His head and left arm were by the fountain, while his torso and lower body were in the middle of the square. The warhorse lay at the bottom of the dry pool, its right hand still holding a long sword, the tip of which was pointed at a charred skeleton not far away. Gwendolyn walked across the square and came to the skeleton. She saw the tree-shaped pendant hanging on the neck of the skeleton, and pulled it off with her hand. At this moment the skeleton moved slightly. Its upper and lower jaws shook, and the charred vocal cords let out a hoarse and weak voice. "Save me. My lady, save me. Is the ritual a success?" "It's a success. My lady, save me." Gwendolyn looked back. The blood pattern in the center of the square was in the shape of a whirlpool. The charred corpses were scattered around the center of the whirlpool. She saw a few footprints leaving towards the northeast. "You did well. Save me, my lady." Gwendolyn smiled and put her hand on its head. "No." The charred man screamed unwillingly. "Why should you be afraid? Death is the best redemption." "What, my lady?" The latter trembled in fear. Gwendolyn's golden eyes looked at him with pity. "No one will die in vain. The dead need justice. No, you will go to hell too." The voice stopped abruptly. The dragon queen silently threw the bishop's corpse away. "Yes, I will go to hell too. Soon," she replied softly. "But it was all worth it." She turned back and looked at the dancing sea of fire. It was as if she saw a quiet and confident figure in the flames. That figure looked at her silently through the fire. "I'm sorry. We have no other choice. This is the fate of the mortal world." Gwendolyn sighed. The long passage of time had caused life itself to lose its meaning. For beings with eternal life, emotion seemed to have become weak. Only the eternal goal at the end of the long path attracted their attention. She had seen many mortals. The short lives of mortals were like the snap of a finger in her eyes. Their existence and death were but the blink of an eye. She would more or less recall it, but the feeling of sympathy had long since disappeared. But there would always be kindness and innocence that would move the heart. If it was possible. Unfortunately, she could not give up all of this for anyone. When she inherited this bloody legacy from the hands of her predecessors, she had already understood this in her heart. She had to be responsible for everyone who had sacrificed themselves for this over the past 10,000 years. Even if they were unwilling, it was not important. If the tree herders could succeed, then everything would be worth it. She left the bishop who was no longer breathing, turned and walked towards the northeast. Soon she found the corpse of a giant wolf in the sea of fire. It was the son of Fenrir. But the latter's stomach had been cut open, and its internal organs were all over the ground. Half the street was filled with the beast's foul and smelly blood. The dragon queen came to the corpse, squatted down, and reached out her hand to search its stomach for a long time. Then she retracted her bloody hand. No heart. She nodded in satisfaction. But this action suddenly froze. "Brando Freya, where are you?" A somewhat frightened and small voice asked in her heart. "Who is it?" The dragon queen stood up and looked around with a vigilant gaze. The sea of fire around the square crackled and burned, but no one answered her question. Other than the sound of burning, there was no other sound. But it was at this moment that the voice sounded again. It was ethereal, like the sobbing of a ghost. "Brando Freya, where are you? I'm so scared." Chapter 1108. Roman had a strange dream. The dream was full of corpses and thousands of dead people. The city was burning in a sea of fire, and the buildings were dying. It was like hell. She dreamed that she had become a baby girl, bound in swaddling clothes and abandoned in a square. The buildings in the square were tall and majestic, but they were burned to ashes in the flames. It was not the architectural style of any city she had ever seen. It was neither Bragg's nor Ampier's seal. It was even more different from Cruz's aesthetic. Without Brando by her side, Roman began to feel afraid. She wanted to call for Brando, call for Freya, desperately make a sound, but in the end she could only cry. Her voice was clear and loud. Until someone came out of the fire. It was a group of knights. The style of their armor was strange. She had never seen this style of armor in Brando's territory. When the group of knights saw her, they immediately shouted in surprise. Roman had never heard their language before. They spoke quickly, but she could understand. "Found her. Kill her, demon girl." "Thank you, Martha, we are saved." The knights shouted and pulled out their swords. However, before they could get close, suddenly a few beams of golden flames fell from the sky and hit the knights. The high-temperature jet passed through their heads and exploded into flames under their armor. Only a few pieces of twisted metal were left scattered on the ground. Then Roman saw some people in black and red robes coming out of the sea of fire. They did not say a word and directly picked her up from the ground. One of them looked at her intently. His face showed an indescribable expression, and he shook his head heavily. He said a sentence. It was different from the language of the nights before, but Roman could still understand it. What a nightmare. He reached out to kill Roman. But the people next to him stopped him. She is at least our most successful work. You can't just destroy her. This is the result of our joint efforts. Perhaps there are other ways. Everything will have to wait for the councilors' joint decision. The man holding the Roman hesitated for a moment, and his hands stopped in mid-air. This plan has completely failed. We might have no choice but to compromise. No, perhaps we still have a second option. The Druids' plan might not succeed. The Bronze tribe is ruthless and full of flaws. The council will never approve of them. This is not good news, my brother. But the monitors found that Martha was acting strangely. In the past few days, she had used 70 to 80% of the network's energy several times. Although it was very short, there were still traces. What is our great mother doing? Projection. She seems to be projecting something. The man was silent. He put down his hand. I'll test it out with her. The Roman dreamt that she was taken away from that city, and then she dreamt of another, more magnificent city, with many magnificent buildings, sacred halls, and many people in strange clothes whom she had never seen before arguing fiercely in her dream. Then she dreamt that she was locked in a dark place, and then she slept for thousands of years. She sobbed in the darkness, calling out the names of Brando and Freya. She slept in her own dream, and in her dream she saw Freya, but Freya looked at her in horror and moved further and further away from her. She dreamt that she was in a small room and the room was a mess. 2 unfamiliar corpses fell at her feet. She dreamt of her aunt, who looked at her with a frown. She pointed at her forehead with her fingertips and muttered something. Then she woke up. As she cried, she trembled as she tried to find her way in the darkness. There seemed to be many strange scenes appearing around her. There was a group of cavalry, their bodies emitting fluorescent light, riding skeleton horses. There were also a few swaying skeletons, their eyes flashing with golden red light. There were also shrieking ghosts, emerging from the darkness. She found that she had come to Bucci at some point. On that night of escape, the army of the undead kept coming, but Brando was not by her side this time. Brando, Freya, where are you? She cried out in fear. Standing on the burning street, the Dragon Queen was shocked to see the thick smoke billowing and surging, forming rows of skeleton cavalry with spears in their hands. The riders were wearing tattered armor, and the ribs and spines were exposed between the leaky chain armor below their waists and abdomens. Their skinny hands held spears and they rode on bony horses. They charged towards her. The ground did not feel the slightest tremor, but the cavalry was already in front of her. The Dragon Queen did not move. Before the skeleton riders and their war horses crashed into her body, they suddenly collapsed with a loud bang and turned back into choking smoke. The Dragon Queen groaned. In front of her, the burning street returned to its previous state, as if the previous scene was just an illusion. But it was only a moment later. She saw a stag made of flames jumping down from a nearby roof, its hooves on fire as it landed in front of her. The stag was like the one Brando had seen in the dark forest. It was tall and handsome, as if it was a perfect creature. The huge creature looked down at Gwendolyn from above, before turning around and heading back in another direction. The aura of divinity. Gwendolyn was a little shocked. She hesitated for a moment, and then chased in that direction. Countless spirits came out of the flames, screaming as they lunged at her, but each of them screamed and disappeared before they could get close to her. Woman and stag chased each other through the burning city, and every time Gwendolyn felt that she was about to reach the stag, it would suddenly disappear and reappear further away. If it had been anyone else, they would have given up, but Gwendolyn felt something. She held an olive-shaped white gem in her hand, and it was slightly warm in her palm. "Don't worry, baby," the Dragon Queen replied in her heart. "I will be with you and we will succeed," she muttered to herself. Roman, however, dreamt of a tree. It was tall and lush and glowed faintly, like the legendary elven tree of the elves, the mother of the elves. Roman felt a little tired. She had grown a little, and now had the body of a 5-year-old girl. She came to the tree, curled up in a hole in the tree and fell into a deep sleep in her dream. The Dragon Queen suddenly stopped. She saw that the ground in front of her was suddenly torn apart, and countless burning thorns shot out from under the stone slabs, curling towards her. Her expression changed and she slashed out with her hand, and an invisible wind blade shot out from her fingertips, cutting the burning vines in half. The curled plants fell to the ground and immediately turned into sparks and disappeared. "That's the golden demonic tree." Gwendolyn finally recognized it. She saw the stag standing behind the burning thorns, looking at her with disdain, and her heart was filled with shock. She probably never dreamed that one day she would experience the feeling of being attacked by a descendant of Fenlitos. The tree herders planted golden demonic trees all over Wonde, but one day they were planted right in front of her door. Gwendolyn suddenly recognized the tree. The tree herders gave each of their experimental subjects a different number, and she recognized that the seed of the golden demonic tree was brought to Erwin. It's it. She finally understood. This was the girl's dream. She suddenly shuddered. The Will of Dusk had recovered so quickly, and just one of its dreams was enough to affect the real world. I have to find her quickly. I have to be faster. The thorns moved again, and they intertwined to form a wall of whips that rolled towards her. The Dragon Queen let out a strange growl from her throat. If a draconic scholar was here, they would find that it was a sound that had been layered over 1,000 times, and it accurately weaved the 7 lines of law together. A blinding white light shot out from Gwendolyn's mouth, and the burning vines screamed as they melted. But to the golden demonic tree, as long as its body was not harmed, it would not lose its ability to fight. The thorns immediately rose from the ground and surrounded Gwendolyn in a dense cluster, intending to trap her. Gwendolyn immediately flew up, avoiding the annoying entanglement. No one knew the nature of the golden demonic tree better than she did. She looked around in the air, trying to find the main body of the golden demonic tree. However, it was at this moment that a white light shot towards her. It was only then that the Dragon Queen saw what it was. It was a stone worm, a creature that lived in the elemental plane of Earth. It was a mortal enemy of the golden demonic tree, but now these 2 natural enemies were working together against her. The stone worm was at least 10 times larger than the ones Brando had seen before. Gwendolyn screamed in exasperation, "Mother of stone worm!" She was then sent flying. If one were to look down from above, they would be able to see that in a certain area near December Square, after a chain reaction, a row of burning buildings on a street collapsed one after another. Gwendolyn climbed up from the rubble, her face covered in dust. She patted the flames on her hair with her hand, but there was no sign of frustration on her face. Instead, her golden eyes lit up. She bounced up from the ground, and a pair of huge wings spread out behind her back. She flew towards the Mother of Stone Worm in the air, and punched the body of the Mother of Stone Worm. It was as if the previous scene had been repeated, but the 2 sides had switched places. The Mother of Stone Worm let out a roar, and then flew back like a cannonball, crashing heavily on the ground. In a cloud of dust, it turned into smoke and dispersed. At this moment, Gwendolyn finally found the main body of the golden demonic tree. "Found you, little girl." She grabbed at the air with her divine hand, and the sage's power spread out, pulling the golden demonic tree up from the ground. After losing the nourishment of the dream, the illusion that appeared in the real world immediately shattered into pieces, turning into sparks that filled the sky and dissipated. In the Roman dream, the elven tree seemed to have suddenly withered. She climbed out of the tree hole in a daze and looked at the scene sadly. 2 ice dragons flew out of the thick smoke. Scram! Gwendolyn roared and tore them to pieces with her bare hands. But at this time, the Roman finally arrived at the battlefield of Ampere Seal. The Dragon Queen raised her head and looked at the huge shadow standing in front of her. "Giant God Soldier." She gritted her teeth and said, "All for one, this is what you have done." The huge thing punched at her, and Gwendolyn did not dare to take it head-on. She quickly dodged. She knew that in the Roman dream, the latter dominated everything, and the giant God Soldier left a deep impression on them, which meant that the strength of the latter was extremely exaggerated. The giant God Soldier punched the ground, and she watched as an area of about 300 square meters was turned into nothingness, and became a crater dozens of meters deep. The full power of a supreme-class attack was nothing more than this. But to the giant God Soldier this was obviously not the full power. It turned around and then swept its palm at the Dragon Queen. Gwendolyn knew that this could not go on, and she could only use her full power in her dragon form. But if she dragon formed, the holy temple of the dragons might immediately descend on her head. Gwendolyn obviously did not want to fail, so she had to find another way. She flew high into the air and landed on the arm of the giant god warrior, before circling to its back and descending all the way down. The giant god warrior slapped itself heavily on the back, the shockwave almost causing Gwendolyn to vomit blood. As a sage, she should not have been so weak, but the truth was that ever since she was injured in the Battle of the Evergreen Corridor, she had not recovered her full strength. But the shock wave also accelerated her fall, and she carefully avoided the feet of the giant god soldier, and came directly below it. As expected, she saw the merchant lady standing on the street in a daze. The Roman's eyes were closed and her body was surrounded by black gas. She tilted her head slightly and looked at Gwendolyn curiously and suddenly asked, "Did Brando ask you to come find me?" The giant god soldier made of thick smoke above their heads immediately disappeared. Gwendolyn stopped and looked at the human girl in front of her carefully. Speaking of which, this was not the first time she had seen her. Decades ago she had seen the Roman as an infant on the final battlefield. Then, near Vargas, she had seen this girl from afar, but the time was not yet right. She took a light breath as if to calm her agitated heart. "Twilight Dragon, in the end we still won," Gwendolyn said coldly. "Brando?" the Roman asked softly. She frowned slightly and showed a pained expression. "Brando? I." The merchant lady's voice gradually lowered, and then her tone became cold. "Are you the one who awakened me, mortal?" It was as if in front of such a great will, even a noble and powerful creature like a dragon was as insignificant as an insect. "Who are you?" the Roman asked. "The one who defeated you," the Dragon Queen answered quietly. Chapter 11:10. What's this? The little boy turned the thing in his hand over and over again, and then raised it up to take a closer look. It was a white metal cylinder with exquisite patterns engraved on its surface. "This is a knight's shin armor, the armor for his feet." The big man took the object from the boy's hand and placed a high helmet on the latter's head. The latter immediately felt darkness in front of his eyes. He hurriedly tried to lift the heavy helmet, but he accidentally knocked his head on a nearby charred wooden pillar, causing a burst of friendly laughter. The girl with the thick eyebrows couldn't help but roll her eyes at the crowd. She then glared at the big man, causing him to feel guilty. She hurried forward and took off the helmet, and the little boy, who was dizzy and disoriented, regained his sight and found his footing. However, after shaking his head vigorously, he looked at the helmet in the girl's hand with a pitiful expression. Seeing this, the big man couldn't help but laugh. The girl with the thick eyebrows glared at the boy. "Here you go." She then threw the helmet over to him. The latter almost fell to the ground before he caught the helmet. He hugged the helmet like it was a treasure and looked at her cautiously. "He's been a bad boy since he was young." The girl with the thick eyebrows cursed in her heart, causing a burst of cheerful laughter. Hippamera looked at the scene with great interest. Her aloof attitude made her a natural leader among the crowd, but the crowd took it for granted. It was as if a priestess would not be a noble if she didn't act this way. Someone explained to her, "Priestess, Polluk's father is a declining knight. The family's wealth is not enough for him to continue on this path, so he was sent to Rushta to be an apprentice. If he earns enough money in 2 generations, this title can be inherited. After all, he is still a noble." Another person added. Only then did Hippamela understand why the big guy had such prestige among the crowd. She nodded thoughtfully, and in the eyes of the crowd, it was an acknowledgement of their words. For a moment, their attitude couldn't help but become even more respectful. At this time, the big man patted the boy's head and praised, "You're a good knight. When I'm rich, you can be my attendant." The boy seemed to understand, but he still hugged his treasure tightly, causing the crowd to laugh again. However, the girl with thick eyebrows did not look happy. "What's so great about being a lousy knight? You should just be my father's apprentice. When you've finished your studies, my father will naturally let you take care of the business. Yes, when you marry Miss Adega, we'll have to call you Mr. Lupak." The others coaxed. "Bah." The girl with the thick eyebrows raised, blushing. The big man just smiled and shook his head. Everyone was joking, but their hands were not slow. They each picked up a defensive weapon from the ruins. Even the girl with the thick eyebrows pulled a crossbow from the scorched wall. The bow was a little burnt, but the string was intact. She then dug out a palm-sized dagger from the rubble and pinned it to her waist. The big man also instructed them to find a few sets of cotton-padded armor from the unburned armor rack. For untrained people, this was probably the only armor they could handle, but it was still cumbersome to wear. Fortunately, although the big man's family had declined, he had received a full set of knight education. Although he was not experienced, he was at least well-versed in the theory. He himself put on a chainmail and a breastplate. It took him a lot of effort to instruct the others to help him put them on. He also put on a light helmet, tied a belt around his chin, and pulled out a double-edged sword from the charred barrel. The sword was perfectly quenched, and its surface emitted a faint blue light. The big man very professionally flicked the edge of the blade, and a crisp sound was heard. As expected of the imperial capital. You won't find such a beautiful sword even in the best blacksmith shop in the countryside of Rasik. As he spoke, he carried the sword. He looked like a young knight on foot, or at least a knight's squire. Hippamera tilted her head and looked at the armor. Too thin, too light. That was her evaluation. How could such light armor do the job? The Dragon Knight of the Temple of the Earth weighed at least half a ton when fully armed. Not including the mount, even a knight on foot could only reduce the weight of the armor on the upper half of his body. The armor on the upper half of his body was not much different from that of a Dragon Knight. In her mind, the assault armor that Rode designed for the subterranean dwellers was the most aesthetically pleasing. Of course, the weight of the armor used for charging and ambushing was naturally lighter than that of the standard armor used by the knights. However, she did not say it out loud. She knew that it was a matter of courtesy. Everyone thought that the high priestess looked down on these things. Of course, she did look down on them. They passed through 2 streets before arriving at this place. They were lucky that they did not meet a single secret society member along the way. Earlier, the wolves seemed to have scattered into the city, so the journey could be considered more daunting than dangerous. However, no one dared to guarantee that they would be so lucky in the future. The big guy happened to know that there was a weapon workshop nearby. Plus, the old man's legs were weak and he needed to rest at any time. That was why he suggested that they come here to take a break and look for some weapons for self-defense. Hippamera felt something when she passed by this area. Planeswalkers and cards of fate could sense each other, so when she heard the big guy's suggestion, she naturally agreed. Their luck was indeed good. When they arrived at the weapon workshop, it was only half burned down. The people in the shop had long run away. After they knocked down the wall to extinguish the fire, they actually found many good things in the shop and under the ruins. Everyone was in high spirits. Activities like dividing the loot were very popular. Although these weapons and armor were now buried under the ruins and abandoned like worn-out shoes, they were still worth a lot of money in normal times. Thus, they wore their helmets crookedly and held all kinds of weapons in their hands. It was a comical sight, but they were in high spirits. Hippamera didn't urge him. She went to the other side of the weapons workshop and muttered a few words. She stretched out her hand and pointed between the bricks. An imperceptible light blue light spread out from her fingertips and disappeared into the ruins. The girl with the thick eyebrows who had followed her all the way here looked at this scene with great admiration. She asked carefully, "What is this, High Priestess?" "My name is Hippamera." "This is a spell," Hippamera answered seriously. "A spell?" The girl with the thick eyebrows murmured. She thought to herself that this was a spell. This was the second time the priest had performed a miracle. He didn't seem to be like the priest of the parish who treasured his own spells. She did not know that the abilities of the priests of the parish were limited, and their work was often heavy. Every holy spell had to be carefully considered before they could be used to ensure that it was used in the right place. Hippamera continued to explain, "This spell can ensure that we can see the hidden magic waves." The girl listened as if she had fallen into a fog. She nodded as if she understood, but in her heart, she thought that the high priestess was very approachable. If it were the priests of the parish, they would not even bother to explain to the commoners. Soon, Hippamera saw circles of ripples seeping out from under the bricks. Some were big, some were small, some were thin, and some were dense. She ignored the others and only reached out to grab one of them. With a crash, something rose from under the ruins. The girl with the thick eyebrows was shocked. She knew that this must be another spell even without Hippamera's explanation. As for what kind of spell it was, she did not need to know. But she saw a pair of silver-white gauntlets rising from under the bricks. The gauntlets were made of light and thin metal. They were stacked on top of each other and strung together. The surface of the gauntlets was coated with a layer of silver-white metal. The surface of the gauntlets was engraved with dense and beautiful patterns. There was a finely carved silver sheep's head on each nail. On each sheep's head, there was a magnificent and fine ruby inlaid. It emitted a soft glow under the firelight. "Ah!" The girl with the thick eyebrows could not help but exclaim. The gauntlet floated towards Hippamera. The high priestess reached out and caught it. She did not care about the gauntlet itself. Instead, she put her finger on the inside of the gauntlet. There was indeed another layer of leather inside the gauntlet. She gently rubbed it and a golden card slid out from it. Before she had time to look at the face of the card bloomed with a golden light. When she held it in her hand, she found that the card had completely changed. First of all, the gold card had turned into silver. There was a picture of a nun holding a holy grail and chanting loudly. Ghosts surrounded her, but no evil could invade her. The words on the card read, "Iron Hymn Faith IV Light 5, Earth 5. Enchantment, pay XMP and choose X targets to gain immunity 3. Immunity to damage 3 or below or increase defense by 30%. To maintain the iron him will exist forever. But every time to maintain it to the next level, you will need to pay MP again. Will like iron, heart stronger than gold. Just as Hippamera's index finger touched the slightly cold surface of the card, she heard a voice in her heart. Hippamera? My lord. The high priestess was delighted. She did not even care about the card of fate and calmed herself down. My lord, I'm here. What's wrong? Why can I contact you all of a sudden? Brando's voice was a little puzzled. I understand. Maybe it's because I've just assimilated a card, so my planeswalker ability was automatically strengthened. Hippamera thought for a moment before answering. Assimilated a card? Hippamera focused her mind. The card and the gauntlet appeared in her mind. Brando was in the ruins of the Cat and Beard Inn, but he could not find any useful clues. There was still a trace of Gaia's blood left in the ruins. Other than that, there were also the corpses of the secret society's followers that were scattered everywhere. The angel Iroma was floating in the air. Her body had shrunk to the size of an ordinary person, but she was still serious and unapproachable. She was a demigod. Compared to the golden folk that Brando had seen, she was more sacred but less human. She reminded him of something like Milos, the god of giants, as if she was a pure war machine. At this moment, when Hippamera focused, he suddenly saw what the latter saw. He exclaimed softly. The first thing he noticed was the gauntlet. It could not be helped. It was like a player's instinct. A pale blue frame had subconsciously popped up on his retina. Is this a fake Fist of Tereos? What's the Fist of Tereos, my lord? The Fist of Tereos is part of the armor of Fanzin's strongest knight. In addition to its own attributes, excellent defense, each of the sheep's heads on the nail stores a powerful blessing. There are a total of 8. From left to right, they are the seal of virtue, the sword of benevolence, the shield of praise, the fearless heart, the crown of glory, the place of martyrdom, the words of respect, and the spirit of selflessness. Corresponding to the 8 virtues of the knight, the 8 blessings can raise the strength of the wearer to a level. Ha! Hippamera did not care about the light gauntlet at first, but this time she was shocked. So powerful? Of course, the one in your hand should be a fake made by a dwarf master. Although the workmanship is not inferior to the original, the blessings in the sheep's head can only be used once a day. It is not like the original, which is continuously effective. Brando glanced at the data on the pale blue menu. The attributes of the fake Fist of Tereos were slightly worse than the original, but at least it was the work of a dwarf master. The original inherited the consistent characteristics of the magic equipment in the era of the War of the Holy Saints, which only added a single attribute, giving it 74 points of strength. The fake used the new technology after the first era, giving it 44 points of strength and 15 points of vitality. In fact, it was also enough to reach the threshold of an ancient item. This was a rare fake that was almost the same as the original. My lord, your equipment? Hippamera wanted to say that in the last battle his equipment was broken into pieces. But Brando shook his head and interrupted her. This thing is more useful to you but not to me. It is one of the most suitable equipment to work with the will of the mountains. Unfortunately, if it was the original, this thing could make your combat power surpass mine. He shook his head in disbelief. The Fist of Tereos disappeared after the War of the Holy Saints with the death of the Knight Tereos, along with his famous knight's armor, Finality Hub. This thing had not been found by players in the Amber Sword, and according to everyone's guess, this thing should not be found in the new version yet. Brando looked at the card of fate. In comparison, he was not that surprised by this card. Since he became a real planeswalker, he understood that after the War of the Holy Saints, there were almost no real planeswalkers in Wond. However, there were many apprentices like Gerald who had 1 or 2 cards and had the potential to become planeswalkers. Chapter 11:11. According to Hippamera's description, the card was hidden in the glove, which meant that the previous owner of the gauntlet might have been a similar existence. He had a card and the card might have run through his entire life. At the moment of his death, he kept the card in this pair of equally precious gauntlets. The 2 items were passed down from generation to generation. Because ordinary people could not see the cards of fate, the secret of the gauntlet had never been revealed. Unfortunately, the card was assimilated by Hippamera's Planeswalker's rule as soon as she got her hands on it. Otherwise, he could have guessed the identity of the card's previous owner based on the card's appearance. As the most knowledgeable naturalist in Wond's knowledge in this era, Brando was quite confident. Keep the card. The gauntlet can be used now, Brando said. By the way, where are you? Did you see the Roman? The Roman lady? Hippamera asked curiously. What happened to her? Something happened. She's missing. Brando sighed in disappointment. What? Hippamera was quite surprised and quickly replied, I'm near the 12 Moons Square, my lord. Wait for me there. I'll be right there, Brando said. Okay. Hippamera nodded and left the telepathic link. Like most people, the thick-browed girl beside her could not see the cards of fate in her hand, nor could she hear the conversation between Hippamera and her lord. She only saw Hippamera spacing out for a while before regaining her senses. The latter did not dare to ask anything. Hippamera put on the gauntlets and picked up a ring from the ruins. She did not tell Hippamera that the ring was enchanted with a beautiful defensive spell. However, Hippamera's attention was attracted by the large emerald on the ring. She was overjoyed. When the two came out from behind the low wall, they found that the situation outside was quite different from what they had imagined. The relaxed atmosphere among the crowd was gone. With the big guy in the lead, everyone stood in the middle of the road. Even the grandson of old Aji's grandmother was no exception. Some of them even drew their weapons and confronted the secret society's disciples with stern expressions. On the other hand, the other side seemed to be much more relaxed. About a dozen disciples in black robes sneered as they looked in her direction, as if they were waiting for her to appear. They were not in a hurry to make a move. Seeing Hippamera walk out, one of them immediately shouted, Lord Priest, you're finally here. These guys want to drive us away. What happened? Hippamera asked. Himmelad's teachings were peace and tolerance, and she herself did not like to fight. If the other party also came for the weapon, it was not a big deal to give in. Anyway, those things are useless, she thought. Ask this guy. Someone was kicked out of the crowd. The young man in the black robe stumbled forward a few steps, complaining in his heart. He was the one who had secretly left the marks along the way, but he did not expect to be caught red-handed. He also did not expect that his colleagues would ignore his safety and directly block his way. Faced with Hippamela's gaze, he naturally stammered and couldn't say anything, afraid that this Miss Priestess would destroy him with a lightning bolt of divine retribution. At this time, the thunder of retribution had silently completed the version update in his mind. You go to the back and pay attention to your own safety, Hippamera replied. What? The young man was stunned. You won't kill me? Hippamela shook her head and didn't say anything. She wasn't familiar with this era, but she wasn't stupid. These disciples of the Black Flame sect were filled with killing intent. How could they care about leaving someone alive? If they were lucky, they might be able to survive, but that was only a small chance. At this time, the big guy in front suddenly turned his head and said, I think they are looking for you, my lady. Looking for me? The other party quickly answered her question. An old acquaintance walked out from behind the group of disciples. It was the Lord of Corruption, Andesha. She placed her hand behind her neck and gently pushed up her long hair. Her vine-like hair wriggled like worms, causing people to feel nauseous. But no matter what, she was still a charming woman, especially with her voluptuous body and towering breasts. She looked around and licked her lips. Little girl, we meet again. Where is your lord? Andesha's eyes were calm, but her heart was filled with vigilance. No one knew Brando's strength better than her. He was still an insignificant little fellow in the loop of trade winds, but her strength was nothing compared to his in just half a year. Even if she used her divine blood to undergo a second baptism. That little prince's blood is really delicious, this thought flashed through her mind. However, this still could not offset the fear in her heart. This was simply too terrifying. If someone had told her that drinking plain water could also increase her strength, she would have definitely pinched that idiot to death to prevent others from treating her as an idiot. But now she would probably still crush that fool to death. Drinking plain water to increase one's strength, what's the big deal? There were people here who could eat and sleep, and their breathing would become stronger. If Andesha knew about the game The Amber Sword, she would have screamed in her heart, Jim, someone here is using a cheat. She was vigilant, but she could not go against the Dragon Queen's words. She was also someone she could not afford to offend. Andesha carefully looked at Hippamera, and her mind was spinning. I must stop these people, I can't let them ruin the Dragon Queen's plan. Frederick, who was summoned in a hurry, is still weak. It would be best if she could capture the little girl and use her to threaten that person. As long as Brando was not close to her, Andesha knew that the little girl in front of her was not her opponent. So she first used words to test her, trying to find clues in it, but she was wrong about one thing. Hippamera stopped talking the moment she saw the woman. At this time, the difference between an ancient priest and a modern priest was obvious. If it were a priest of the Holy Cathedral of Fire, they might have a verbal confrontation, but they would slowly prepare for battle when they could not gain the upper hand. However, Hippamela was the priestess of Himmelad. In ancient times, priestesses were trained in such a way. They were warriors first and then priestesses. The harsh natural environment and the constant need to participate in the war to open up the territory of order required a qualified priestess. Even if Hippamera was a pacifist. But that was a pacifist for thousands of years. There was a big difference between their definitions. Miss Cleric didn't say anything and directly threw out the card that she had just obtained, Iron Hymn. 2 angels with trombones in their hands descended from the sky, and a choir sang hymns in the clouds as they slowly walked down a snow-white cloud path. The holy song descended from mid-air and integrated into the cloth armor, cotton armor, and even ordinary clothes of every citizen present. Then they were surprised to find that the cloth armor on their bodies gradually turned into shining chain armor in a white light, and the cotton armor became thick inlaid leather armor. The big Pollock became a fully armed dragon knight. The armor on his body seemed to weigh at least half a ton, but it was so light that it did not affect the latter's movements at all. This is a miracle. This is a large area blessing holy spell, it's a war prayer. The knowledgeable people had already cried out in surprise, but it was a pity that his knowledge was limited to this. Miss Priest is a war priest. The crowd exclaimed, and even the fear of facing the cultists had lessened. The cultists on the opposite side were even more restless. Looking at Hippamera's actions, who did not know that she was a military priest. A war priest was a high-ranking military priest, and it referred to monks and priests who would fight alongside the army, and not those who would clean up the battlefield, sprinkle water, and pray for the dead. Such priests were becoming rarer and rarer in this era, and people usually referred to them as holy knights. The reason why the Flame Knights of Cruz were so powerful was because they were also military priests. Most people who fought alongside them would feel safer and more at ease, but their enemies would often feel their scalps go numb. These were the elites of the Holy Cathedral. You're from Fanzan. Andesha finally reacted and shouted in exasperation. In this era, the war priests of the Holy Cathedral of Fire were used to taking the initiative to attack, and only the priests of Fanzan liked to use holy spells first. But she still recognized her wrongly. After all, the glory of the Holy Cathedral of Earth was something that happened before the Holy Spear of Heaven and the mountains and rivers were lost. It was so long ago that it was almost unreachable. Hippamera did not intend to answer any questions. Focusing on self-restraint was the basic requirement of a priestess on the battlefield. The enemies they faced in that era were the powerful dusk species, so how could they be distracted on the battlefield? The priestess was a little curious and thought to herself, this crazy woman isn't even fighting, so why is she chattering non-stop? If Andesha knew what she was thinking, she would probably vomit blood from anger. Hippamela chanted in a low voice, and several beams of light descended from the dark night sky, landing on top of everyone's heads, illuminating the entire street in a holy white light. Everyone who was within the light immediately felt their strength increase exponentially, and their mental fatigue seemed to have been swept away in an instant. They were so excited that they couldn't help but shout. It was like the sound of a bugle horn on the battlefield. A moment ago they were just a group of civilians, but now they seemed to have mastered the memory of battle. Their helmets were put on properly, and the long swords in their hands were not crooked. Their ranks were orderly and they were ready to attack at any time. This was her element, the land of holy light. This polarized defense and blessing element was one of the rarest AoE elements in the whole of the Amber Sword. This element was actually an element that was similar to the element of time. It allowed people to trace back thousands of years of memories, and obtain the experience and skills they wanted from it. At this time, the cultists were no longer facing a ragtag army of commoners, but an army of ancient heroic spirits. If not for Hippamela's ability not being pure enough, these people would have sprouted wings and turned into an army of angels when the extreme planes unfolded. Hippamera used this ability not only to save the lives of these civilians, but also to use the light beam to guide Brando's position. She knew that when she drew the elements from the elemental pool, the Count should have known that there was a battle here. Andesha was stunned. She had seen blessing spells before, but she had never seen a blessing spell of this level. If the bishops of Farnazane were all at this level, then the Kurlutzians and the Wind Elves would not be far from being destroyed. She opened her mouth and tried to urge the cultists around her to hurry up and stop the small fries. But while she was smart, the others were not. Some of them were already cramping up their calves and were ready to retreat. You guys go and delay the disciples of the Black Flames. They are no match for you. I will deal with Andesha. Hippamera did not waste her breath on the battlefield. She shot out as soon as she finished her sentence. The ruby on her finger glowed slightly, and the power of the selfless spirit manifested. Andesha could feel her body brimming with energy, and her explosive power, reflexes and insight were all enhanced. She swung her hammer towards Endesha. Endesha's confidence was boosted, and she could feel the power of the selfless spirit surging through her body. Endesha could feel her body brimming with energy, and her explosive power, reflexes and insight were all enhanced. Endesha was not surprised but happy instead. After the second corruption, her strength was a level higher than when she was in the loop of trade winds. Now that she was facing Hippamela, her strength was 2 levels higher than hers. She did not expect Endesha to seek her own death. At this point, she could no longer be bothered with those useless disciples of the Black Flames sect. With a wave of her hand, a vine whip shot towards Hippamela, who was in mid-air. But when the vine wrapped around Mountain's descent, Endesha felt that something was wrong. Her law of corrosion did not have any effect. Of course, Endesha was thinking too much if she wanted to use her law of corrosion to corrode the divine weapon. At this time, the first sheep's head on Hippamela's left little finger glowed. The seal of virtue manifested. Faith and will, perfect spirit, supreme virtue. The ideal of a knight's life, the perfect spirit, manifested in Hippamela's body. This was a flawless will. If Brando's wall of will allowed him to deal with most mortal spells, then Hippamela could ignore some of the more fundamental things. In an instant, all the lines of law around Hippamela, whether it was the lines of law from the Holy Land or the lines of law from Endesha's elemental corrosion, all of them deviated and were no longer under Hippamela's control. Endesha's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Supreme will barrier, nullification of laws. Author's note: I said I would rest for a day, so I'm back. Chapter 11-12. The original seal of virtue of the Fist of Tereos was a continuous buff that could last for several hours, while the fake seal of virtue of the Fist of Tereos was an ability that could store mana. It could only be activated for 7 seconds a day, and did not need to be used all at once. After Hippamela broke through Endesha's erosion whip, she immediately closed the seal. In that instant, the ruby on her right little finger had dimmed quite a bit. She estimated that she only had 2 or 3 seconds left. If she reacted quickly, she could activate it twice, but if she reacted slowly, she would only have 1 use left. This was the second time she landed on the ground. Previously, she had covered a distance of 20 to 30 meters with a single step, and she landed firmly on the stone floor. As long as they were still standing on the ground, the power of Gaia would be continuously transmitted to them. With a slight increase in strength, the power of Gaia would be reflected back to the ground at 10 times the speed. The ground of the street exploded, and the priestess shot towards Endesha like a cannonball. Everyone could only see a shadow flashing past. Endesha could clearly see Hippamela accelerating towards her. Although this speed was nothing to her, she was still wary of the supreme will barrier from before. For a moment she did not dare to face it head-on, and instead took a small step back. Hippamela saw Endesha taking a step back, and a thought flashed through her mind. Her hands did not stop moving, and she directly smashed the ground with her hammer. Endesha's battle experience was not inferior to Hippamela's by much, and when she saw this action, she understood her intentions. Get out of the way. The ruby on Hippamela's right ring finger flashed, and the sword of Shushan was activated. At this time she already had the power of Gaia, the Holy Land and the Selfless Spirit buff, and with this buff she had 4 buffs. The mountains will buff her attack and strength up to 75 points, and the sword of Shushan also provided a 30% attack buff, making her 97 points. With the addition of the strength buff, this attack was at the level of Brando before he was in the Koldu Manor. The hammer smashed into the ground without any fancy moves, and a visible shockwave spread along the street. Endesha's expression turned ugly. She could easily avoid the shockwave if she flew into the air, but even if she couldn't, it wouldn't affect her much. After all, the shockwave was only close to the level of a Lemeter. She stretched out her right hand and an arc-shaped green light shield spread out with her right palm as a fulcrum. When the shockwave collided with the light shield, the nearby ground immediately arched up. The impact pushed the soil and stone slabs to pile up in front of the light shield, but the latter did not move at all. It did not show any signs of breaking. The barrier protected Endesha and the disciples behind her, but the situation in other directions was not as optimistic for the Patriarch. The former could ignore attacks that were close to the Lemeter realm, but that did not mean that others could do the same. The shockwave swept past the feet of the disciples of the Black Flames and they were immediately sent flying. One after another, they fell into the nearby ruins. The lucky ones only suffered broken bones while the unlucky ones were pierced by broken wooden stakes. Some of the unlucky ones even fell into the fire and immediately let out terrifying screams. Andesha's face was as black as iron. She did not care about the lives of these people, but she regretted her decision. She did not expect that this little girl would be so cunning. At this time the spectators in the distance were excited. Under the lead of the big guy they charged forward. The disciples of the Black Flames were already in a mess from the previous wave of attacks, and this time they were completely defeated. "You will regret this." Andesha screamed in anger. She was about to go crazy. She did not put Hipamera in her eyes, and her target was Brando, who was behind her. She did not expect that she would suffer such a huge loss because of her carelessness. As if to prove her anger, accompanied by her scream, there was a sudden loud bang on the street. Something rolled up the soil from the ground and stretched out. That thing was so huge and had appeared so suddenly that Hipamela didn't have time to see it clearly. She could already feel a strong wind mixed with the smell of earth rushing towards her. She did not have time to react, but her instincts from the training in the Holy Cathedral allowed her to activate the ruby on her left middle finger. Her defense doubled, and with the 30% defense provided by the iron hide him, the surface of her feathers of light glowed with a metallic luster, and a faintly discernible illusory shield appeared in front of her. But all of this was useless. The huge object slammed heavily into the illusory shield, and the invisible shield immediately shattered into pieces. The unstoppable force continued forward and landed on her body. Hipamela was immediately sent flying, crashing heavily into the burning ruins behind her. "Miss Priestess! Miss Priestess!" Everyone could not help but cry out. Hipamela crawled out from under the rubble with much difficulty. Her snow-white face was bruised in several places, and blood flowed from her nose and mouth. She looked at the thing that had risen from the ground and realized that it could not be described with words. It looked like a tentacle, but its shape was constantly changing. What was even more surprising was that it was impossible to remember what it looked like just a moment ago. On the surface of the tentacle there were many human faces. Some were frightened, some were in pain, some were sad, and some were in despair. The only thing they had in common was that they did not have eyes. Their empty eye sockets were pitch black, as if they wanted to suck people's minds into them. This was definitely not something that should be in the material world. Hipamera could feel the evil and despair from the tentacle. The tentacle was 20 to 30 meters long, but she knew that its body was even bigger. This was not something she could deal with. "Run!" she immediately shouted to the others. Everyone did not react in time. At this time the tentacle pressed down on Hipamera again. Hipamera's right hand flashed and activated the glorious crown, martyr's stand, and words of modesty. She raised the will of the mountains and rivers in her hand. Bang! The tentacle pressed down on the cross warhammer. Hipamera felt her feet sinking, but she managed to block the attack. The glorious crown increased all skills by 5 levels for 15 minutes. Martyr's ground increased all attributes by 30% for 20 seconds. Words of reverence increased all attributes by 10% for 20 seconds. Words of reverence increased all attributes by 10% for 20 seconds. Andesha almost thought that her eyes were playing tricks on her. There was actually a mortal who could block Frederick's attack? "Miss Priestess, do your best." Everyone's hearts that had just been raised calmed down again. They could not help but cheer. The young disciple next to the crowd stopped himself from shouting. He couldn't help but sweat profusely as he wondered what was wrong with him. But Hipamera knew that this was not a long-term plan. Not to mention the short duration of the 8 holy seals, she felt that the monster did not use his full strength. It was as if he was toying with his prey. This was an evil god. As the priestess of Himalud, she was a believer of Gaia just like the tree herders. She was no stranger to these twisted creatures. She could even feel which Frederick was the evil god. The evil god Frederick, the most brutal lord of the ice plains. "I have to get everyone out of here." A sense of responsibility welled up in the priestess' heart. This was the compassion and generosity inherent in the daughters of Gaia, the maidens of the mountains. The tentacle swept towards her again. This time Andesha also made a move. She was determined to get rid of this threat before Brando arrived. Otherwise, the combination of the young man and the little girl would be too terrifying. Hipamela, on the other hand, revealed a card. Holy Song of Protection. A white light bloomed between Andesha and the tentacle's attack. This card was converted from Enrolda's holy ring. It made people immune to all damage, so Hipamera was not injured. Instead, she used the force to fly far away and landed beside everyone. As soon as she stood up, she immediately shouted to the girl with thick eyebrows not far away, "Take everyone away." After her previous observation, she already knew that the most authoritative person was the big guy. But for the big guy, Miss Adagia's words were the most important. Although the girl with thick eyebrows had only been with Hippamera for less than an hour, she believed the latter's words very much. She quickly said to the big guy, "Listen to the priestess' words." At this time there was no need for her to remind them. The others had already seen that the priestess was not a match for the terrifying monster. Of course they did not blame Hippamera for not doing enough. After all, everyone could see how terrifying the tentacle was. Most ordinary people did not know that the strength of a monster was not directly related to its size, and this was even more true for the evil gods. As soon as Hippamela opened her mouth, they immediately scrambled to escape. The big guy wanted to pull the girl with the thick eyebrows, but the latter slapped his hand away. "Go help grandmother," the latter said loudly. She then helped the injured Hippamera up and prepared to chase after the others. The grandson of Aji's grandmother followed beside them, but he was not afraid at all. The girl with thick eyebrows could not help but pat his head. "Good," she said, "you will be a great hero in the future." The little boy immediately puffed out his chest. Everyone fled along the streets. Andesha was not worried when she saw this scene. She only laughed disdainfully. If the great lord of the frozen plains, Frederick, allowed a group of ordinary people to escape from him, it would be too laughable. As expected, in just a few moments, dozens of tentacles shot out from the ground from both sides of the street. These tentacles were separated by dozens of meters, and no one knew how big the evil god's main body was. As soon as the tentacle appeared, it immediately swept towards the crowd. It could have easily caught up with everyone, but it calmly started to attack the slowest person. The latter screamed as he was rolled up, and then it crushed him, turning him into a rain of blood. A thick sense of despair enveloped everyone's heads. At this time, even the stupidest person could see that the other party was simply toying with them. Hippamera also seemed to have seen through this. She stopped and pushed the girl with thick eyebrows aside. "You guys go first, I'll bring up the rear." "Lord Priestess?" The girl with thick eyebrows was stunned. She looked at Hippamera in a daze, unable to say a word. The others who ran far away also stopped. They looked back and shouted, "Adagia, Lord Priestess, what are you doing? Hurry up." "Lord Priestess, she said." The girl with thick eyebrows stuttered. "I'll bring up the rear. You guys run or none of us will be able to escape." Hippamera repeated to everyone. Everyone was stunned. The priestesses of the Holy Cathedral of Fire would never say such a thing. Their duty was to maintain order. Although the protection of civilized society and ordinary people was required by the doctrine of the Path of the Golden Flames, it did not include self-sacrifice. In this era, in many parts of Wonde, the religion's definition of protection was derived from this. It was illogical for the priestesses of civilized society, especially the high-ranking ones, to sacrifice themselves to protect ordinary people. Civilization had taken root in this troubled land with so much difficulty. In the eyes of most ordinary people, every outstanding individual should be protected so that they could play a greater role in the world of order, and not die for some insignificant people. The priestess was so outstanding and she looked so young. She should be a genius in any holy cathedral. How could they let a genius die for them? Such selfishness would make even the most despicable person feel ashamed. Everyone subconsciously stopped in their tracks and said loudly, "Lord Priestess, we'll go with you." "You guys go." Hippamera smiled. The scene in front of her reminded her of the past in the Holy Cathedral of Earth. Every mother's child was glorious and proud before they lost this glory. "I'm the priestess of Himalud. Mother's daughter." The girl with thick eyebrows opened her mouth. "My lord, we can't let you die for us." "I won't die." Hippamera was certain as if she was stating a truth. "My lord will come to protect me." "My lord." The tentacles had already crushed 2 rows of houses on both sides of the street and came behind them. The girl with thick eyebrows looked over there with extreme fear. The big man behind her was so anxious that he wanted to rush over and carry her and run, but he knew that he could not do so at this time. Hippamela then looked at the black-robed young man, who had followed them all the way here in a muddle-headed state. "You should run with everyone," she said. "I'm a disciple of the Black Flames." The young man replied in shock. "My lord, it doesn't care who you are." Hippamera pointed at the approaching tentacles. "No." The young man's head was full of sweat, and his long curly hair was stuck to his forehead. He refuted loudly. "I mean, I'm a disciple of the Black Flames. My lord, don't you care?" Chapter 11:13. You are a disciple of the Black Flames. Hippamera smiled. "Do you know the origin of the disciples of the Black Flames?" The young man was stunned. Pandora's box was opened. Wars and plagues, monsters and disasters came one after another. This was the origin of the so-called calamity of civilization. That was the most glorious era of the Temple of the Earth. The daughters of Gaia and the Myrnas protected this world of civilization and order. In that era, Hipamera knew that there was a group of people who had lost their families and loved ones because of the invasion of monsters. They swore revenge and used the black flames as a mark to be enemies with the monsters for the rest of their lives. They were called the Three Swords of Civilization along with the Temple and the Legion. But as time passed, the swords had decayed. She gave the big guy a look and the latter immediately rushed up to pull the girl with the thick eyebrows and ran. Everyone finally began to turn around. The young man in the black robe was stunned for a while before he followed hesitantly. He thought for a while before he tore off the brooch that represented the secret meeting from his robe and threw it into the ruins at the side. Behind everyone, a dozen tentacles finally caught up with Hipamera and pressed down on her together. "Miss Priestess." The girl with the thick eyebrows could not help but scream. Hipamera's figure disappeared. Frederick's tentacles surrounded the priestess in the center. They intertwined with each other and there were thousands of faces on them. These faces changed their expressions and let out lingering whispers, like a low sigh in the ear, whispering and not stopping. Hipamera felt a voice squeeze into her mind. That voice was like hundreds of voices overlapping. They repeated different intonations and different contents. It was buzzing and noisy, but it made her understand the content. "They have betrayed you. The Temple of the Earth no longer exists. I recognize you, little girl. You are the priestess of the Temple of the Earth. You do not belong to this era?" Hipamera pursed her lips and frowned as she stared at the big guy. She was still a little afraid in her heart, but she was the shepherdess of Himalud. She had to stand here and watch over the flock of sheep on behalf of the goddess. She took a deep breath and her chest heaved up and down. "I know you too, Fredridge, and I cannot be deceived by your sweet words," she cried. A low chuckle squeezed into her mind. Hee. But I found something interesting in the way these people think. Do you want to see it? What a pity. The once glorious holy cathedral has now become a vassal of the barbarians. Do you know how the Earth Holy Hall was destroyed? The cacophony of voices was incoherent and annoying. With thousands of tones overlapping together, it was as if there were thousands of people chattering in one's head. "Those mortals don't understand at all. How arrogant are you? They only know how to seek personal gain. They killed your companions and betrayed your faith. You don't fit in with this world." Hipamera was silent. The last sentence pierced her heart. The young girl's eyes sparkled. She opened her mouth slightly, but her heart was filled with softness. She understood that she was indeed incompatible with this world. This was not an era that belonged to her. Hipamera was the king of the mountains. Her arrogance made her throne carved at the peak of the mountains, under the howling cold wind all year round. Her priestesses were equally arrogant. Every shepherdess was the most outstanding and beautiful young girl among their peers. Their hearts were pure and flawless, their wills were firm, and their status was incomparably respected. This arrogance was innate, as if they were naturally above the mortals. They protected the mortals like a flock of sheep guarding the goddess. Because the sheep were weak and needed their protection. They were strong so they could show mercy. But that era was over in the end. From the moment she was summoned to this world, she understood this principle. This was an era of mortals. Hipamera silently put away the arrogance in her heart. She was a smart girl and knew how to protect herself. She learned to smile politely as if she was gentle and approachable like the girl next door. She looked at this world without saying a word. Because she understood that she was incompatible with this world, she only evaluated this era in her heart. Backward production techniques, old weapons, weak strength, undetermined fighting will. This was the era of mortals. Perhaps it was still warm but too weak. If the goddess was still here, would it be different? How would such a world fight against the twilight? She felt a little strange. She did not understand why Lady Martha and the gods would make such an arrangement. But on the other hand, she did not dare to look up the history books about the past. She understood that she was afraid. Because arrogance could not tolerate mistakes. They can't even learn to be reverent. They only have cheap gratitude. But it will soon disappear and they will forget you completely. Only worship and reverence can be maintained for a long time. "Go and kill them," Frederick's voice guided her patiently. But the last ruby on the sheep's head nail lit up automatically. A knight's fearless heart came from a fearless spirit. It eliminated all fear and confusion, and was immune to all interference from the mind and will. It blocked the soul and cleared the mind. Hipamera suddenly woke up. The confusion in her eyes disappeared, and her gaze became more determined. Arrogance will eventually lead to destruction. Nothing lasts forever. The glory of the Temple of the Earth is just a part of history. Its survival is just a moment to the world itself. She opened her mouth and answered, "Ha ha." Listen to this arrogant tone. Look at this high and mighty priestess, commenting on the progress of history with the eyes of mortals. How arrogant. It seems that you still don't want to give up your position in the past. Frederick's sharp and thin voice retorted. It was like the shrill noise of a file. Hippamera looked up at the intertwining tentacles and replied loudly, "Frederick, you can't confuse me. My personality is not my weakness. I've never been ashamed of it, because the pride in my heart is not the source of my blindness. And because I've seen many people better than me, Frederick. Even in this era, it's the same." Frederick fell silent. After a long while he said sullenly, "Oh? There's actually someone who can make a priestess of Himalud say such a thing. How puzzling. You're lying, little girl. Disappointing, detestable. The era of the ancestors is over, leaving behind a disgusting world." Hippamera smiled and said with admiration, "That's because you haven't seen him. He can be an enemy of an empire for a promise. He's not strong, but he's brave and strong-willed, humble and clean. He doesn't have any of the bad habits of the nobles. He's neither frivolous nor arrogant. The ideals and beliefs he carries are so pure, as if they came from the sages of ancient times. It's no exaggeration to say that I'm full of reverence for His Excellency." Frederick's voice buzzed as he recalled. In the end it turned into one. "The reverence of a priestess of Himalud is puzzling. Let me see the little thoughts in your heart. The seeds of deceit will sprout in your mouth. You can't deceive yourself, little girl. Tell me, who is that?" Hippamera replied with a smile, "My lord." "A mortal?" The voice was full of disdain. The former sighed softly and looked at the terrifying tentacles in front of him with a strange expression. "This is the era of mortals, Frederick." "So what?" Frederick replied with a thick sense of contempt. "You're counting on a mortal to save you?" "My lord won't save me," Hippamera replied. "He's here to kill you." Frederick let out a deafening laugh, and more than a dozen tentacles trembled as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. "A mortal kill him?" Brendel sneezed loudly, and he could not help but furrow his brows in confusion. Ever since he entered the gold rank, natural diseases were no longer able to affect him. His body was 100 times stronger than a normal person, and it was an understatement to say that he was like a bull. Could it be that someone was spreading an unnatural plague around here? He knew that Andesha and Mayad were in the city. Even though the latter was dead, who knew how many patriarchs there were in the city? Tree herders loved to play with these filthy things the most. Ever since Hippamera's last communication with him, he could no longer connect with her through telepathy. However, he could feel that her elemental pool was weakening, and he guessed that she was in a battle. Who knew if she was a tree herder? Or more likely, she was a tree herder. His gaze swept across both sides of the burning street. At this time, most of the buildings in the South City district had been burned down. Only some embers were left of the 2 rows of houses. The non-burning bricks still maintained their original structure, but without the support of the wooden structure, it was hard to say how long they could stand. Soon he saw a group of refugees. The group slowed down as they walked. The girl with the thick eyebrows was the first to stop. The others seemed to be infected by her and stopped one after another. No one spoke. This was the best outcome. They were lucky to survive with only 2 or 3 casualties. The holy cathedral was right in front of them. As long as they reached there, they would be safe. However, they did not feel the slightest bit of joy in their hearts. The atmosphere was oppressive and no one knew what to say. Normally, when their lives were in danger, most of the people here would be more than happy to have everyone stand behind them to protect them, as long as they could escape with their lives. However, at this time they felt as if their feet were filled with lead, and they could not move anymore. The boy did not understand the adult's silence. He kept asking where the priestess was. He wanted to turn back to look at her several times, but he was stopped by the tall man. The tall man did not say a word. He was a knight, but he took off his helmet and threw it far away. The girl with the thick eyebrows held his hand. Her heart was heavy, but she could not blame anyone. What was the use of them staying? "Priestess won't die," she muttered. "She said that the Lord will come and save her." She was so sure. "The Lord? But how can a priestess have a lord?" someone asked. Everyone quickly thought of the reason. "She lied to us. She was worried that we would not leave." When this was said, everyone became silent. There were only a few cold-blooded people in this world. Although some people were selfish, it was only because of their survival instinct. Everyone present felt their throats tighten. Something seemed to have appeared in their dry eyes. Some of them blinked their eyes desperately. The young man in the black robe silently followed behind everyone. But for a moment he felt that he saw something. When he turned back he saw that there was nothing on the street. He rubbed his eyes, wondering if he had been thinking too much recently and was hallucinating. But his mind was in a mess. He did not know if he was thinking about where to go after leaving the secret meeting, or if he was thinking about the priestess' last words. Do you know the origin of the disciples of the Black Flames? Of course he knew the origin of the disciples of the Black Flames. The bishops used this as the glorious history of the secret meeting. But there were not many believers in the lower class who believed in this. Many people joined the secret organization for various purposes. Most of them were just seeking protection. He was one of them. After hearing so much, perhaps he had accepted his identity. But subconsciously, he still did not believe that the disciples of the Black Flames had such a glorious origin. Are we really fighting to cleanse this world? Asking himself, the young man felt that there was no answer to this question. But he could feel that the priestess did not look at him with any discrimination. She was not filled with disgust like the nobles. He thought about these things and turned around again. But he was shocked to find that everyone in the room had silently taken a step back. It was as if he was suddenly standing in the middle of the crowd. What is going on? The young man was shocked. Then he heard a voice that he did not want to think about even in his dreams. It was as if it came from the deepest part of a nightmare. Excuse me, the priestess you are talking about, is she such a lady? Such a polite way of asking a question was like a noble's, but the other person's tone was not disrespectful or condescending. Instead, it was gentle and approachable. Everyone looked at the young man who suddenly appeared in front of them. He is a count. The big man thought. This person is not Cruz's man. Perhaps he is the lord of the priestess. The girl with the thick eyebrows had such a thought in her mind. Chapter 11:14. Excuse me everyone. Is the priestess you speak of a lady like this? The young man's expression was solemn. He stretched out his palm with his palm facing down. Everyone saw a cloud of dust gather between his palm and the ground. The glittering dust swirled and formed a picture. It was Hippamela's appearance. Ah, sister priestess. The boy exclaimed in surprise. The young man raised his head and looked at the crowd. My name is Brando, Hippamela's friend. Please tell me, where is she? You are her lord? The young man Brando nodded. You will save her, right? The girl with the thick eyebrows asked carefully. In her eyes, although the young man in front of her was wearing tattered clothes, he had an indescribable temperament, just like the palace knights outside Cephas's gate. He was calm and composed, and his manner of speech was extraordinary. Moreover, his skin was white and smooth. He did not look like a commoner. What happened to her? Lady Hippamela was stopped by a monster in order to protect us. The big guy looked at Brando cautiously and answered in a low muffled voice. What kind of monster? Brando asked again. Where is it? Sir, a voice came from behind. Everyone looked back in surprise and found that the one who spoke was the young man in the black robe. The latter's head was covered in sweat as if he had just been fished out of the water. He raised his hand and said to Brando, I will take you there. Brando looked at the young man and glanced at the pattern of the black robe. Disciple of the Black Flames? He thought. But he knew that there were many low-level disciples in the disciples of the Black Flames. Most of them were blinded by temptation, so he did not mind and only replied, No need. Tell me, what kind of monster is it? Everyone's heart sank, thinking that this young man still had the mood to ask questions at a time like this. The girl with the thick eyebrows furrowed her brows, and her eyes revealed a look of disdain. She probably thought that he was one of those noble youths who looked elegant on the surface, but was actually a coward who was afraid of death. If she told him how terrifying the monster was, he would definitely find an excuse to avoid it. If it weren't for her grandmother gently holding her hand, the young girl would have been unable to hold back her sarcastic remarks. Brando didn't think too much about it. As a qualified warrior, understanding the enemy was a basic skill. Otherwise it wouldn't be saving people but putting himself in danger. He knew that in this city, there were not many monsters that could threaten Hippamela, and whether it was the horseshoe beetle or the evil god Frederick or anything else, they could also pose a threat to him, so he had to be careful. Brando understood what they were thinking from the looks of suspicion on their faces. He couldn't help but shake his head, but he didn't explain because there was no need to. He waited for everyone's answer. We didn't see the monster's appearance clearly, but we saw many tentacles that looked like octopus tentacles rising from the ground. The young disciple replied. He was the only one who didn't think that Brando was afraid. He was even a little afraid. Not long ago this face was his biggest nightmare. Tentacles? What kind of tentacles? Every tentacle was taller than a two-story house. It was as thick as a person hugging it. There were many human faces on it. The young disciple thought for a moment before answering. That's the evil god Frederick. Brando understood. What did he say? Evil god Frederick? A few whispers came from the crowd. The legend of the angel Aroma was widely spread in the Bankdale region. As the other half of this legend, the evil god Frederick was the best way for mothers to scare the naughty children in this area. In other words, almost everyone in this area grew up under the shadow of this great demon king. Frederick would often come in the night to kidnap the naughty children, or take away their candy, new clothes, pillows, and other trivial things. In terms of tiredness, this evil god might even surpass the sanctum to become the busiest person in the capital. And naturally, his name was deeply ingrained in the hearts of the people. They actually summoned an evil god. The young disciple's face turned pale, and he almost fell to the ground. It was clear that he had long suspected this, but he didn't dare to confirm it. Is what he said true? Someone grabbed his collar and asked fiercely. But the girl with the thick eyebrows didn't look at them. She thought to herself, evil god Frederick, what a good excuse. He'll definitely find a way to avoid it. It's not worth it for the priestess to have such a lord. She looked at Brando with disdain. In her eyes, the latter was the most useless of all. Brando saw that the crowd was about to push the young disciple, and he quickly interrupted them. Where is that monster? I mean, where did you and Hipamara get separated? His question startled the girl. She thought that he would leave immediately, but her preconceived disgust made her explain herself. Let's see how long you can pretend. Sir, I know. It's just south of here, less than 3 streets away from here. The disheveled youth hurriedly broke away from the crowd and came to Brendel's front, gasping for breath. That's the east side of the 12th month square. There's a dwarven weapon workshop there, right? Brendel asked. That's the east side of the 12th month square, isn't it? The crowd couldn't help but look at Brando in surprise. They probably didn't expect a foreigner to know so much about Rusta. If it weren't for Big Guy, many of them wouldn't have known that there was a weapon workshop there. Even Big Guy himself knew very little about the owner of the weapon workshop. Yes, the young disciple quickly answered. At the same time he asked, Sir, do you need me to lead the way? I'm not afraid of danger. Brando looked at him and shook his head. You're not afraid of danger, but I have to be wary of you. You're a disciple of the Black Flames. Besides, I really don't need your help. He pondered for a moment. In the eyes of the crowd, he seemed to be hesitating. The disdain in the girl's eyes became more obvious. Even the young disciple's heart sank. He thought to himself, is this lord really planning to escape? However, the young disciple slightly agreed. After all, it was the evil god Frederick. Frederick was a real god. Just like them, what could a mortal do if they went there? Brando didn't have the heart to care about what these people thought. He closed his eyes and his perception of space spread out like water. In an instant, it spread over an area of a few thousand meters. This was the new ability of his elemental mastery after reaching the peak of the elemental laws, spacetime control and spacetime perception. If there were gold or elemental masters in the nearby streets at this moment, they would see such a strange scene. The lines of law seemed to have come alive as they passed through the streets and alleys. Tracing back to their source, they would find that the dense silver lines had gathered into a huge cocoon of light. Flashing information streams gathered from all directions and summarized into Brando's mind. Unfortunately, the people present were all ordinary people. They couldn't see the spectacular silver lines of law surrounding Brando at this moment. Only the big knight faintly sensed it. He was still looking left and right, suspecting that he was hallucinating. He had learned some knowledge about elemental mastery from his father, but it was too far-fetched. It was said that only his grandfather's father's generation had barely touched the realm of elemental mastery. He had no idea that the young man in front of him was an elemental mastery master. It was obvious. How was this possible? Everyone spent a few long seconds in doubt. During this time, the girl with the thick eyebrows wanted to speak several times, but she was stopped by her grandmother. Grandmother Aji's this person? She couldn't help but feel a little angry. The old woman only shook her head at the girl. Offending a noble would bring a lot of trouble to the family. She had lived to this age and had seen many of it. She couldn't let this girl be foolish. Besides, it wasn't necessary. Although she felt pity for the approachable Miss Priestess. The girl with the thick eyebrows seemed to respect the old woman, so she could only shut her mouth and sulk. After a few seconds, Brando finally opened his eyes again. Just when everyone thought that this noble young master had considered saying some polite words and retreating, He only raised his head and said to the sky. About 2,700 meters. You can see it too. Everyone looked up. Above them was a pitch-black night sky, but it was reflected red by the fire in the city. But other than the billowing smoke and dancing sparks, there was nothing else. There was no response from the void. Only Brando's calm voice echoed in the empty streets, as if it was a matter of course. Everyone looked at him strangely. Could it be that this noble young master was too thin-skinned and couldn't find an excuse? Had his brain been fried? Very well, since you can see it, Brando spoke again after a moment. Head 3 streets south from here. Aim at old Sardin's weapons shop and blast it for me. Before anyone could ask what was going on, all of a sudden, a thin golden line was reflected in their eyes. Everyone was dumbfounded. Even the girl with the thick eyebrows who was about to question could not help but subconsciously shut her mouth. The golden line descended from the clouds and pierced through the night sky. The clouds slowly rotated at its starting point to form a vortex, and the golden line fell vertically to a certain location in Rushta City. If they were not mistaken, it was 3 streets south where they came from. Frederick, who was sneering, suddenly froze. In the distance, Andesha also looked up at the golden line hanging from the sky. She did not know the angel Aroma, but she knew this method. This golden line was connected to the constellations of the war dragon Tiamat and the platinum dragon god Bahamut. Someone was directly mobilizing their power. This was definitely not the power of a mortal. Unless the 2 world dragons came in person, only the highest authority could mobilize such an attack. Was it Martha? Or was it the Holy Lance of Heaven? But it wasn't. A golden holy sword was reflected in Anderson's eyes. It shone brightly and hung alone on the peaks of the mountains. One of the 12 tree shepherds patriarchs subconsciously took a step back. An extremely uneasy feeling shrouded Frederick. This feeling was too familiar. He did not know how long ago when the same terrifying aura almost completely annihilated him. Aroma? It let out a tragic scream, and its huge body instantly shrank down. Countless tentacles seemed to want to immediately drill back into the ground. But it was still a step too late. Right in front of Hippamera, a golden light was reflected in the girl's eyes. It fell along the golden line, and under her smiling gaze, the golden light went straight into the ground. With a loud bang, continuous flashes spread along the entire street. Countless mud and stone slabs were lifted up from the ground. Frederick's tentacles under the ground were retreating at a speed visible to the naked eye, but they were still caught by the explosion. The tentacles seemed to swell and then the whole thing exploded. Suddenly, flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Then, more and more tentacles were blown off and flew into the sky. The flash continued to move forward, like a sharp knife cutting the ground. Soon, Frederick's body was exposed under the open air. It was an extremely ugly, twisted mass of flesh, as if countless human bodies were mixed together and formed by intertwining with each other. Fortunately, as soon as this disgusting scene appeared, it was hit by a ball of golden light. Amidst an earth-shattering scream, the ball of flesh completely exploded, turning into blood and minced meat that filled the sky. Then it fluttered and fell to the ground. It was as if it was raining blood. "How dare you sneak attack me, Aroma?" Frederick's voice was much weaker than before. It shouted hatefully, "Follow me and I will soon have my revenge." Then the buzzing sound completely disappeared. Thousands of meters away, the people who witnessed this scene were completely stunned. They turned their heads stiffly and looked at the young man. If they had thought that he was just a useless rich second generation before, they couldn't help but start to guess who he was now. And what was that terrifying spell, just now? But Brando did not care about them. He pulled out his sword and said to the void, "Your old opponent is not dead yet. Go after him, I will deal with Andesha." Frederick is a monster born from Gaia's mother's blood. It is very difficult to deal with. As long as it comes into contact with mud and rocks, it is almost immortal. It is normal that it does not die so easily. But the way these people summoned it is not right. It is very weak now, and it is not a match for me in my current state. A slightly cold and neutral voice replied in the void. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.